Welcome, fellow heathens. Is I, Count Jackula, your favorite satanic streamer, and today we have someone special. We have Joseph Marsh, aka Psycho Sorcerer of Project Infinity,
The Grand Infinity is
the
what it's.
Grand Infinity. Yeah,
Yeah,
the
the name
YouTube
just
channel.
got changed, so you know.
Yeah. I was a little bit more familiar with Psycho Sorcerer.
hmm
Um, but you recently rebranded the channel as Grand Infinity.
hmm
And also recently, like not too far back, you did a video that really caught my interest, which was the idea that most magical concepts are actually psychological
Right.
concepts. You know, that this
Yeah.
is not just, not just like random spiritualist mumbo jumbo kind of stuff, but like
Right.
the actual like magical methods that have kind of like lasted, which seem to have some legs.
hmm
Like those seem to be deeply, deeply psychological, or at least the parts of it that haven't just become science.
Right. Yeah.
You
Exactly.
know, you know, I yeah, we and me and regular on the stream, Yogi Devdas have talked about that at length. So I thought it'd be cool to get someone else who also had that opinion.
Sure.
how'd you come by this? How'd you come by that opinion?
Well, I actually kind of started out more in that way. So I've been studying the occult for a long time. I've only been practicing for about 7 years now.
Hmm?
So, but I started studying it back when I was 16. Now I'm 36. So study took a long time. And during that time, I kind of came up with a concept that maybe these things could be explained using some modern day terms. And then I kind of started practicing with that in mind, and it still worked. It didn't need the spiritual elements. So I thought, okay, that proves it. But then as I've come along in my experimentation with this, I have my own ideas about that now as well. So I think for a large portion of it, we can say it's psychological, though there are some parts where, we travel into another zone with that.
Yeah. Well, like someone who I think would probably absolutely agree with you would have been Carl Jung.
hmm
You know, have you studied Carl Jung at
I
all?
haven't studied him at length, but I've studied a lot of his concepts. I love what he talks about with synchronicity and with the archetypes and things like that, because I think that stuff is all
Yeah.
dead on. That
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
matches a lot of my experience.
Yeah, for those of you playing at home, synchronicity is your tendency to notice really, really odd patterns
hmm
that in an ordered universe seem like a little bit more than random chance, but you
Right.
can't. But they don't hold together. Don't hold together as a logical cause and effect relationship. Like a really good example, a really stupid movie example of that is the guy in Repo Man explaining his plate of shrimp theory. He's like,
hmm
everyone sees the world as an unconnected series of events, but then one day you're thinking shrimp, a plate of shrimp, and then someone else goes like, hey, you want to get some shrimp?
hmm
No explanation for it. You know, that would be a synchronicity.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of times when people ask me to kind of explain to them what magic is, other than using the obvious Crowley definition of, using your will,
Yeah.
science and art, all that, it's to explain synchronicity because that helps people understand. Because everyone wants to know, like, oh, what's the limits of what you can do, can't do? I'm like, if you think of it as being able to have not necessarily control over, but an ability to affect the chance within that synchronicity, that's kind of how a lot of magic seems to work. It's like,
Yeah, absolutely. You
yeah.
know, it's one of those things where like someone will like like I did, like you will have a vision of the peacock angel, and then all of a
hmm
sudden peacocks are just everywhere
Yep.
in a place that places you didn't even realize that they were. One of the most striking being my desk.
hmm
Like my desk has peacock feathers on it, or had. I've moved them to the altar.
Right.
But it was so I had that vision. I was like, wait, there are peacock feathers on my desk. I must have put them there like years ago and then just never thought about it. I was
Right.
like, oh, whatever, this looks nice here. And then as I was looking around, because I had this vision, I was like, why don't I work with Malek Taus, King
hmm
Peacock, and we'll
Yeah.
see what happens. And I'm like, all right, so let's get some Peacock stuff for this altar I'm building. And the day I decided I was actually going to do it, all the Peacock related stuff went on sale.
Yeah, nice.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and
Hmm.
it's weird stuff like that where you're just sort of like, this feels like this is more than coincidence, but
Right.
you'd be loath to call it a cause and effect relationship.
Yeah, and that's why it's hard to explain because on the one hand, a lot of this stuff that I think they were trying to explain in the past is actually psychology, but they didn't have that back then. So if
Yeah,
you're able to shift it, you can look at it as psychology. But there's another factor to it where we're actually able to affect reality in a way we don't understand through our own psychology. And that's why some people will hear my explanations in particular the videos on science and magic that I did early in, and will say, well, you're missing this and you're missing that. And I try to explain to people, it was kind of like a warm up to get people in the right state of mind. Like I wasn't originally coming
yeah,
at the idea of speaking to the mystical community or the spiritual community. I was trying to talk to people who didn't know anything about magic and be like, well, what about looking at it this way instead of thinking it's this other thing? Like, what about looking at it on a psychological level and then kind of ease into the idea that, and then also weird stuff happens.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And of course, like the weird stuff is, as I've said often, it's like the weird stuff is usually your indication that something is working.
Right. And
You
I've had
know,
experiences since coming out with that video that have proved to me that there's even weirder stuff than I knew back then. So some of the stuff that I say in that original video, I would say now, well, it's more than psychology. But I still feel like that video encompasses the starting point that can get anyone who's maybe not already looking into magic to understand it in a different way, to get them on the right starting point. And then you just find those other weird things and try to figure out if they're still psychological to you or not. I don't want to
yeah,
give people the impression that it has to be one way or another.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's often a threshold that like a lot of people are a little loath to cross for obvious
Hmm.
reasons.
Yep.
Like very very obvious reasons. Like for example, I watch a lot of I became very curious about Jordan Peterson, if you know who he is. And as I pointed out to people in the stream, I was like, he always gets to this point where he says, it's more than that. It's,
Yeah.
and then he pulls back. He
Yeah.
pulls back. And I'm like, you almost said it.
Hmm.
You almost said it. And given the fact that he was like a student of Carl Jung and that he's also considers himself a religious man, I'm
Right.
like, oh, I get where this is all coming
Hmm.
from.
Yeah. And
You
it's the
know,
same thing with Carl Jung himself. If you look at his
oh yeah,
theories, they have to accept ideas that still currently aren't accepted in order for all of them to work.
yeah, yeah, and it's really odd because the science works really really well for describing the material universe. It works
Hmm.
extremely well. Like it's the best thing we've ever come up with.
Yeah.
It's super precise. It's super accurate, but of things of an ephemeral nature, including thoughts themselves,
Right.
it struggles because it's constantly going, we don't really know what that is.
Right.
How do we measure it? How do you measure free will?
Right.
How do you even measure perception?
Any
You
kind of
know,
thought in general, we don't really know how to measure. I mean, we can
yeah,
assume
yeah,
by looking at the brain, you go, okay, there's these areas are lighting up, there's this electrical stuff, and you can theorize that maybe that's the thoughts themselves somehow, but it doesn't
yeah,
explain what you're actually experiencing, what you're actually seeing. Because if you're like me and you've gone down
yeah,
that rabbit hole, you see things that are as real to you as this world. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. It gets really, really freaky. Like
hmm.
there was, if you like, one of the one of the really the first things that I noticed that was really freaky when I stepped out of the magical world and just kind of was like, all right, well, everything is, I went through big atheist phase. I
Yeah.
denied everything.
Hmm.
I think all of us
Yeah.
do, and I think that's important for the human soul.
Yeah, I
You
think that's
know,
part of you like clear out all the old programming doing that, and then you're ready to
yeah,
to start again.
yeah. But there was this one line from the movie Waking Life, because I watch a lot of movies because I love storytelling. Um, that always stuck with me. which was, so, the whole idea is the guy's moving in a lucid dream state, and the whole movie's his lucid dream.
Mm-hmm.
And he runs into this one girl who starts talking to him about her idea for a show. And it seems like a really normal conversation. And then he goes, here's the weird thing. I'm dreaming, and you just told me that. I didn't think that.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and that's the kind of weird stuff that happens.
Yeah.
You're like, and it leaves you with the question is like, is this a piece of my psyche that is
Mm-hmm.
different from my consciousness, or is something
right.
else at play, or is there no difference?
Right. And so that video that I did way back when, I think it was 2 years ago now, the Science of Magic, I think that's both my most loved and hated video, because people who want to understand magic and they want it told to them in more of a left brain logical way are like so thankful to see this version of it because it can get their feet wet on it. And so I get praise from it from that side. And then a lot of the people who've been either working in magic a long time or are from a more spiritual background look at it and go, well, this is kind of a young view. You haven't explored everything. Well, I wasn't trying to explore everything in that one. And then also at the end of that video, there's a period where I make a few assumptions where I say, okay, well, here's what I know so far. And it kind of explains it as a psychological model. And then I said, well, here's some ways you maybe could explain these other phenomena psychologically. And that's the part people always hate because they're like, well, you can't explain entities that way and this and that. But if they listen in the video, I didn't say this is correct. I said, this is a way you could look at it.
You could look at it, yeah.
Just trying to frame it. And then in later videos, I've gone in to say, that I believe there is something else external that's involved when you deal with entities and things like that. So
yeah. I can't. It's one of those things that's irritating where I always have to I always have to preface it with I can't prove it. I could very well be wrong.
Yeah.
But it definitely feels sometimes like you are dealing with something. You're at least dealing with something that is not part of your conscious mind.
Right.
At the very least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The question is it a subconscious thing? Is it like I hesitate because I just recently talked about repressed memories in one of mine, but that's a good example. Like a repressed part of your psyche speaking to you from the subconscious, or is it an external being? And that's something that I would assume there's no way to know. You just have to.
It's really hard sometimes. Like the only thing that I have to go on, this is an experience I've related to people on the stream before, which is so at the height of my previous dealings with magic in my 20s, not coincidentally, I was really massively into psychedelics.
Okay, cool, yeah.
Yeah. And I had this one experience. It's really clear. I was in the middle of the hallway walking around. Of course, I'm like, walking around like a little dizzy and like with a kind of goofy grin on my face because that's what you do. And all of a sudden I hear voices. Like I actually hear voices, and and as I've always said, and this is the moment where I go, "Oh shit, this is it. I've gone insane."
Yeah, right.
I've gone completely insane. They're gonna put me in a padded room, and as soon as I think that, the voice goes, "No, you're not insane, and you're not hearing voices."
Right.
And I'm like, "Whoa, wait a minute. Okay, well, what am I talking to?"
Yep.
And it responded like this. It said, well, what does it sound like? And I'm like, it sounds like there's an argument in my head. I hear two voices. And it's like, yes, I am one. And it said, you need to think of it. The best way you could understand it is to think of it like this. I am the left part of the brain, and the one arguing with me is the right part of the brain.
Yeah, sure.
That's not what it is, but you can think of it that way.
Yeah, you wouldn't accept it that way.
Yeah. You wouldn't be wholly incorrect.
Right.
Because I was smart. I knew enough about neurology at that point to realize left brain and right brain is kind of a myth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's like the 10% of the brain thing that people use. It's a great analogy, but we use all of our brains, so
yeah, exactly. And so I basically go, okay, well, why are you talking to me? And they're like, and they both respond, we're not talking to you. You can just finally hear us. This is a conversation that happens all the time.
Right.
There is never a point when we are not having this conversation. And I'm
Right.
like, wait a minute. So I'm just high enough to be able to understand you now. And it goes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What am I here for? And the answer was very clear. It is like, oh, you decide.
Yeah.
When we can't come to a consensus, you decide, because
Yeah.
we can't figure it out. So we're just like, hey, you, conscious mind, make a decision.
Right.
So I go like, wait, so you're basically telling me there are 3 people in my head at least at all times, and only at one time, only am I ever truly always conscious of one of them? And it goes, correct.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe
That
that as a
was,
possible model right there.
yeah, I was like, that was one of the freakiest things that ever happened to me, because I completely wasn't expecting it, and that wasn't something I had any sort of I wasn't primed for something like that. You know, like if you're an occultist, you're primed to speak with spirits. You're primed to
Right.
talk to ghosts. You know, if an angel comes down or a demon speaks to you, you're a little primed for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're like, well, I thought of this because like I was reading Aleister Crowley at the time,
Sure.
and you
Yeah,
know,
you can. Yeah, which also can cause some trouble because you spend a lot of time going, well, was that real or was it this? Which, is healthy to question.
yeah,
But you sometimes you miss the point by doing that, I think. So that's
yeah,
what I've been
yeah,
learning lately.
yeah. It's really weird, like, because sometimes like what some of the weird stuff will happen where like you will hear something and you go like, wait, what the hell is that? And then
Right.
you look it up and you find out it's a thing.
Yeah. And I've had another thing. So here's another example why I know it can't just be our own brain and also the current brain model that we have is that I've spoken to what I guess you would call spirits, and have them say something to me
Oh,
that only I know they're saying to me,
hang on a
and
moment.
then talk to a
No,
friend
go on.
who also heard from spirits that sound like the same spirits from when they are talking and told them the exact same thing without us talking about it ahead of time, beforehand, after, just.
Yeah,
And it's like, how could this information happen to both of us at the same time? Again, synchronicity. But
yeah.
but
Like you could very
is it an
easily
entity?
attempt to
Yeah.
explain it by saying this, which is something that I think is somewhat reasonable, which is the brain is really good at copying stuff.
Hmm.
So it's entirely possible that you and the person you know each other so well that you basically have copies of each other in your mind.
Right. Yeah.
And so if something happens to one of you, the
Hmm.
chances of it happening to the other person under similar circumstances might actually be much higher than we would suspect.
Right. And I even went so far as to say, well, when it was first happening here and there, and I was earlier in, I would say, well, maybe last time we talked, we both sparked a notion that just happened to come to the same conclusions, and we didn't even realize we talked about it. You come up with all of these ways that this coincidence could happen. But when you practice every day like I do, and you get to 7 years in, you're like, there's a lot of coincidences too many to be ignored. It's not,
Yeah.
you start to go, okay, I can keep writing them all off individually, but when I go back and look at this daily journal, it's like there's a coincidence every day, so that doesn't exactly work.
Yeah. Like something is going on. Like
Right.
I have my personal definition, which is, like when people ask me what magic is, I'm like, well, it's an attempt to manipulate reality at the
Hmm.
perceptual and probabilistic level.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's it. And it's like, well, is any of that real? And I'm always like,
Well, it
all
has,
all I can tell you is that shit happens.
and that's one of the reasons I made that other video we were talking about, is because the goal there was to say, even if you don't believe in all the rest of the magic stuff, if you don't believe in entities, if you don't believe in astrology or any of that stuff that takes a more spiritual turn, the self-transformation portion of magic you can use to change your life.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's only psychological, it still has that value. It still gives you better probability. And I was going into why that would be, even if it wasn't kind of from a magical standpoint, which is again why that got a lot of hate. But people, I feel like I did a bad job of explaining at the beginning of the video that I'm giving you a scenario in which if you don't want to look at it as magic, you can still use these practices to great benefit.
Well, yeah, I
And
mean, like
people thought I was
that's
saying this is my end all be all theory, and I was like, well, that's not exactly what I was doing.
yeah. Well, like psychological theories, magical theories evolve constantly.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, it's a never ending, you know, struggle to separate that which can be replicated in a reliable way and that which can't.
Hmm.
You know, and everything, and so far, and because everything that can eventually just becomes science.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but
And I
because
think
you
a
can
lot of this
replicate
will
it.
become
You know,
science one day. That's
hopefully,
my view of it. And then
yeah,
it'll be
yeah.
easier because everybody will be like, oh, I can just pick up a book on it, and instead of it being an occult book where you're trying to fiddle through it and figure out what to keep and what to throw away, it's going to be just a standard manual that people are like, okay, well, I learned that in
Yeah,
fifth grade, you know?
it'll be a textbook, and
Yeah.
there will be, you know, courses on it and stuff. You know, like, well, that's what Terrence McKenna was hoping for.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
kind of
like,
what I'm hoping for too. That's the whole reason for the channel is I wanted to originally I just wanted to demystify a lot of it. I wanted to go through and say here's some primers. I didn't want to teach. I just wanted to say here's some primers on what is this? Like what is the tree of life in Kabbalah? What is Hermeticism,
hmm
you know? And but say it in a way that's like let's cut out all of the magical sounding stuff and get to the root of it. And
yeah,
that was my goal originally going in. But then the community grew up around it and kind of reformed the channel for me, which is good because it's also changed me through the course of it. And so now it's become kind of
oh
a
yeah,
theory channel where I'm like, okay, let's try this, let's see what this is, you know. And it's a little different, but and we get a little more into some of that headier spiritual stuff. But
yeah.
that's never the
Like
intent.
one of the the funny thing is have you ever read Carl Jung's The Red Book?
No, most of what I've read of his, I've read bits and pieces. I've never taken a full manual and just read through it.
You should read The Red
The
Book.
Red Book.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, The Red Book by Carl Jung. There are two versions of it.
Hmm.
If you can afford the $165 version, I recommend it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the story of this book is this. So Carl Jung had this manuscript that was always in his office that he would only share with a select number of people.
Right.
And it became this like legend, the Red Book. It became a legend. And this guy, you know, a translator had heard about it, and he was like, I really want to see this book and translate it into English, because one of the things that was told about it was like it's written in German,
Right. Yeah.
you know. And he's like, okay, well, I can do it. So he gets in touch with the Carl Jung estate, and they make him go through this bizarre ritual. And the ritual is you turn up, you can only look at it in this one room, which is a basement.
Nice.
You are going to be monitored at all times, and you're only to look at the book for 2 hours a day. And it's like, whoa.
That's great.
Like, yeah, you're like, whoa, what the hell is in this book? And so he did, and over the course of like many years, he translates it and scans each individual page. The $20 version is just the translation.
Hmm.
The $165 version has the
All
scans
the
in it.
scans. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And when you look at the scans, if you're familiar with, you know, the Hermetic corpus,
Yeah.
you immediately recognize everything.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
you're just like, oh shit, really?
Yep.
Yeah, you realize very quickly this isn't just a manuscript. This is a grimoire.
Yeah. Right. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it's super badass. And like the whole thing is illuminated. He illuminated it by hand.
Nice.
And it's beautiful. And it's full of really, really heady concepts.
Hmm.
And you look at it and you're like, all right, this is so as above, so below.
Right.
This is, the war of the soul is not the war of one against one, but of one against two.
Hmm.
And you're like, what?
Yeah. Right.
What is he
Exactly.
talking about?
It's
Like what
great.
is Hermes Trismegistus talking about? But like Jung has that exact experience, and
Hmm.
you're just like, oh shit. And it's really interesting because one of the things that Jung talks about at length, he's like, basically the path to enlightenment or the path to paradise leads through hell.
Right.
There
Yeah.
is, and he talks a lot about like, well, if you want to know the spirit of the time, but he calls it the spirit of the time versus the spirit of the depths.
Yeah.
And and if you're a student, if you've looked into
That's really
like
cool.
Kabbalah, you're like, oh shit,
Yeah.
I know what he's talking about. And of course, when he's in the quote unquote depths, like there's this
Oh yeah.
black snake that is following him and all this shit.
That sounds like mine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Has that happened to you?
Yeah, because I got my own stuff over here. I gotta keep track of everything I do, so everything's
Oh
dated and
man,
whatever. I don't expect to one day publish it like how this manuscript, but I guess he didn't either.
he didn't either. Like you
But
could tell
yeah,
the minute you start reading it, you realize why. Because you're like, oh shit, Carl Jung went through like a revelatory
hmm
experience.
Now
The red book could be called like the prophecy according to Carl Jung.
that's awesome. Now you
Yo,
could
it's
you could
super
claim that
awesome.
that this experience is either psychological in nature or was something spiritual. I don't claim to know which, but when I went to the abyss, which
Hmm.
I'm sure is what we're talking about.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
When I did the journey to the abyss, it was all just completely black at first, which I was like, okay, sure, whatever, that makes sense. And I had the notion because if you're anyone who's ever done any of these things, for some reason you have just these kind of understandings of how to do stuff when you're in this state that you don't have
Hmm.
when you're not. I don't know how to explain it other than that. You just kind of like sort of remember being there. Um,
Yeah, for me it was always um the an innate understanding
mhm.
of being able to tell truth from lie.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I had this just knowing that, okay, well, if I want to see, I'm gonna have to light myself up. It's like I can radiate light in this state, so I'll just radiate some light. And then it's like I could see out and who knows how far. But what I realized is I was actually underwater because I didn't, I knew
Oh,
I was floating, but I
interesting.
didn't know I was underwater. I was like, oh, and my thought at the time was, oh, abyss is literal. That's pretty funny. But again, I'm looking at it like maybe it's just how I view the abyss.
Right,
But it's
right.
just this empty water going everywhere, and then suddenly I see something move, and you're just like, well,
Ooh.
what the hell is that? And then I felt this presence just rising up behind me, and when I turned, all I saw was an eye that was as big as I was. And
Oh
then I
man.
basically was scared enough that I just jumped right out of the trance state and was back in my body, like, nope.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
later I went
yeah.
back and dealt with all of that, and it was exactly what you said. It was a giant serpent that I was interacting with. But
Yeah,
that's cool.
yeah. It's really, yeah, my experience wasn't like that. It was really weird because I've started to realize that my own experience is also even a little weird when it
hmm
comes to like other magicians.
Yeah,
Um like there are some people who like see things like that, and there are some people who interact with the things that we call gods.
sure. Yeah.
Um and one of the things that was really weird about it was them telling me, they were like, well, you're from here,
Yep.
like this is where you're from. And I'm
hmm
like, well, wait, I can, it's so easy to navigate this, why? And they're like, you're from here, you're just
Yeah.
born with it. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
that's weird. And you start asking questions about that, and then answers start coming.
Yeah, and I've gotten to this weird place now where I know that some of what you're dealing with is psychological,
Hmm.
but some of it can affect the outside world for sure also. So the question
Yeah,
you're left with is it all psychological and our psyche just affects the outside world? Because magic in general works that way in the first place. It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
that
it's
now other
definitely
parts of
described
you are
that
doing it
way.
without you realizing it. So it's a little trippier. Or is there something else that is affecting the outside world and then affecting your psyche? And then the reason it's psychological is because that's the communication pathway. And that I've never figured out for sure. I have my
Yeah.
beliefs, but I have no way to prove that part of it.
Yeah, yeah, that's the maddening thing about it.
hmm
You're like, you can have that experience. Other people can have the experience, but it is impossible to prove it to someone who hasn't.
Yeah, exactly.
You
And
know, like
just like you
we
said,
don't even know where to start with that.
right. And just like you said, I've worked with a few deities, demons, things like that. And
Hmm.
when you deal with them, there's a degree of it that's metaphor. And it isn't, I think in the past, people who have touched on this but then ran away from the occult, they say that they're tricksters. But I think it's a misunderstanding. I think it's a belief that that what they were saying wasn't literal. It's like, well, it's not because a lot of it is metaphor. And if you do
Yeah.
this enough, you start to recognize that all of this comes mostly in metaphor. But the problem is differentiating when the information you're getting is metaphor and when it's not. So, if
Yeah,
something
that
says
becomes
like,
really
you're
difficult.
my son or something like that, or are you literally that thing's son, or is this a metaphor of some kind of relationship, or,
Yeah,
it's
like
like that.
that perfect example of that. I've said this on the stream before, so I'll say it again. Like one of the things that I experienced, and I experienced it in two different ways twice.
Hmm.
Um, One was like I'm, tripping out because I decided to get into that again, and I am talking to this thing that claims it is my spiritual mother.
Okay, cool.
And yeah, and the thing I laugh at is I'm like, it appeared to me. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Supernatural,
Hmm.
but there's a character on that called Rowena.
Hmm.
It appeared to me as her,
Right.
and I was like, okay, that's weird. But when I thought about like my own like life, that made a little bit of sense
Right.
because my the white side of my family is Irish.
Yep.
So there are a lot of reasons why that might line up. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, so look, it's like your mind is just looking for a connection with a female something, and so your brain came up with Irish witch.
Sure.
Why not? Um,
And I think that's the thing is you can explain it either way.
yeah, yeah, you can,
And you can
and
talk to
the
either side because you can be like, oh, well, obviously, we're actually spirits from the astral, and obviously, because of my heritage, I would have been from that, so that makes sense. Or you can be like,
yeah,
well, because of my Irish heritage, my psychological view of a mother would be this. Like both of them
yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah, and a show is very likely to just hit on that archetype.
Yeah,
You know, um,
it's always hard.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's really bizarre. So like she tells me like all right, so you have a father, and I'm like, well, who is he? And she just shows me an image,
Hmm.
and it's the classic image of Baphomet,
Oh, nice.
and I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
that's weird. Um, It was about the time I was like about the time I was flirting with Satanism, so I
Yeah,
was like, well, I guess that lines up,
yeah.
you know. And the thing that was kind of funny about it was, um, she there was definitely this feeling of like you're his son, and I'm like, oh right.
Right,
And
yeah.
then I had another experience where I run into Baphomet himself, and he is like, "All right, would you like to meet your father?" And
Right.
I'm like, "I thought you were my father." That witch showed up and said you were my
Hmm.
father, and and he says like, "Well, yes and no, you're my son, but you are someone else's child."
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I was like, okay. And then I finally realized what he meant, which is Baphomet archetypally is the god of alchemy.
Yeah, right. He's
You
even in the
know,
in the position like Beelzebub
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah,
below.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Coagule salve.
Hmm.
And I'm realizing, oh, it's SON because it's a reference to the soul. It's a reference to the Philosopher's Stone.
Oh, yeah, okay. So you're
Like
like
you have,
yeah. You're like of him, but
yeah, yeah,
you're not of him, but
exactly.
you are of him. Like I guess that
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah, I got you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, the idea being like, oh no, you're following his path, and so on that level, you're his son because the son is representative of the soul. The alchemy is all about the refinement of the soul,
Hmm.
and there you go. That's what it is. Um,
And it's also interesting that it always seems, I think the reason that we push against this because it's always sounds very egotistical because you
it
talk to these
does. It's
beings that are supposed to be these
massively
uber powerful beings
egotistical.
and then they're like, "Hey, you're important too." And you're like, "Well, hold on a second." And again, you're like, do you just mean in the sense that humans are important or are we talking like me particularly? And they're like, "Yes." You're like, "Yes, which one?"
Yes,
Like, yes
yeah,
to
yeah.
both.
It's definitely that. That seems to be like a universal experience, which is basically anyone who reaches that state is
Mhm.
in some way of the gods.
Yeah.
Like that definitely seems to be the consistent thread.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
the question is always, what does that mean? And you can go so many ways with it. Because
yeah.
I was working with the Babylonian pantheon and the Sumerian pantheon for a while,
Oh,
which that's fun. Uh,
yeah, yeah.
and even
Well,
even
that's
the serpent in
really
the abyss ended up
esoteric.
being Tiamat, so even that falls within
Oh
that
man.
whole thing.
Whoa.
But
Damn.
there were various members of that pantheon where when I spoke to them doing my month with this, month with that type of thing, they referred to me as the son of Enki. But if
Oh.
you look up the Sumerian and the Babylonian accounts, in certain versions of the story, Enki is the father of all humanity. So am I
Ah.
Enki's son or are we Enki's son? Are they
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
human?
yeah.
I don't know. And then that even is only taking it from a spiritual viewpoint. On a psychological viewpoint, am I just explaining to myself that I feel descended from, abyssal chaos and things like that, but have come into some kind of normalcy? I don't know.
Right. Yeah,
And
yeah,
there's
yeah.
three different ways to look at it that all could be right or wrong, and it could be all three. Who knows?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, yeah. That's whoa. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
but
a
it's heavy because
crazy
you hear it
one.
at first and you're like, well, that can't be right. Because you immediately think literally when you're in the moment.
Yeah, yeah, you're like that's yeah, because even when I describe the experience that I've had, I always preface it with, and here's where my ego knows no fucking
Yeah, exactly.
bounds.
Right. Yeah.
It yeah, it's really nutty. It's
Yeah.
really
It's
nutty.
crazy.
And yeah, one of the things, and the other thing is when your head is when you live in America, I think in particularly,
Hmm.
America is one of the few honest to God multicultural nations,
Yeah.
like it and Canada. There aren't a lot of those.
Hmm.
But in America, like everything kind of comes together in this very weird way. It's not always a perfect fit. Things are very strange,
Right.
but I've always definitely had this feeling that like America is a very North America itself is very psychoactive,
Hmm.
you know, way more so than Western Europe, and I mean that both like in the sense of more psychedelic drugs grow here, and there is more of a culture of using them dating back to way before white man ever fucking set foot on the continent.
Hmm.
But in Western Europe, there are relatively few psychoactive plants.
Hmm.
You have to go to like India to find
Yeah.
all the really cool substances in that hemisphere.
Hmm. And then
Um,
it's interesting to see that a lot of the stuff that you start to pull from when you get into these practices comes from India,
yeah.
in one
Oh
form
my
or another.
God.
And
Yeah.
they've been practicing the current religion for I think 5,000 years. It predates Christianity by double,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and then some.
Yeah. And that's not even, and that's going, yeah, it's really interesting. Like, even like Buddhism is older than
Hmm.
Christianity. And we're
Yeah.
not even talking about that. We're talking about like Vedism,
Oh yeah, right. Yeah,
you
the left-hand
know?
path.
Yeah. 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 And you're just like, whoa, that is ancient. Like the
Hmm.
regular Yogi Devdas, that's his wheelhouse.
Yeah, right.
The Vedic faith
Yeah.
is his wheelhouse. And it was with him that we discovered that there were all these weird connections, like very direct connections between India and a lot of stuff in the Middle East specifically, but the convergence point is the Yazidi. We were like, wait, the convergence point is this weird little sect out in the middle of nowhere that everyone is trying to kill, that everyone calls devil worshippers. This is the convergence point,
Right.
and it turns out, yes, they are.
Yeah, it
They
sounds like
are.
a power shift happened at some point, right?
Yeah, well, apparently what had happened is that a bunch of them at one point, like every faith, right? Especially every I forget what the term for it is, but when you have a people that don't marry outside the people,
Hmm.
which is what the Yazidi are, you will have a large faction at some point that will break off and go somewhere else,
Yeah.
because they're just sort of like, you are too set in your ways, you are too stodgy, and we're out of here. We're gonna
Hmm.
go look for adventure south of here and just see what we run into, because Jan, Shamir over there had a vision
Right.
that we were gonna run into a new god if we moved south, so we're gonna do that. So that happens,
Right.
and they take their whole faith of surrounding Malektaus,
Hmm.
the peacock angel, to point south of the Kurdish mountains. And of course, this is like thousands of years ago, and they run into they come into India
Hmm.
and are like, "Hey, other people who are a bit more darker skinned, let us tell you about the peacock angel." And they're
Right.
like, "Well, that's really interesting because we've got this guy who is the most awesome god ever. His name is Krishna."
Hmm.
And and the imagery begins to meld. And
Yeah.
part of
Right.
the reason the Yazidi were found a good place, the ancient Yazidi found a good place in India, is because the Indians also have an appreciation for the peacock.
Right. Yeah. So it all worked
They're,
out.
yeah, so it all worked out, and it becomes this convergence point, like, because one of the things that was always a little bit mysterious about the image of Krishna is that he's always got this trident,
Oh yeah.
and you're always like, what's the trident about? Like, why does he have that? It's like, oh, that's his gift from Vishnu and blah 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 blah, blah whatever, and you're like, but
But
why
why?
that?
Right. Yeah.
And it turns out that Krishna's trident is the symbol for antimony,
Mhm.
which is the alchemical element associated with Malektaus.
It's just a
So
bunch of
just,
synchronicities going on
yeah,
right
yeah,
right
you're
there.
just like,
Yeah.
what? This is crazy. To say nothing of the fact that at one point Krishna had Baphomet like horns.
Yeah. Right.
And it's like, like, what is going on?
You go back far enough in a lot of the different cultures, and you'll find a figure that's kind of the main figure, and he has got horns. It's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
it
yeah, and that's
is.
why people will drive themselves crazy trying to figure out, are these gods the same? Are those gods the same? And I'll sometimes point out some correspondences on my channel, but I try to steer away from trying to draw a map that says all these gods are the same, because at the end of the day, first of all, are they what we think they are in the first place, or is it,
Yeah, yeah.
psychological, or both, or what have you? And then second of all, how would you know? I can
Yeah,
show
yeah. How would you prove
correspondences.
it?
It's like these things correlate, but correlation doesn't necessarily prove that these two things are the same. Like,
Yeah, yeah. It's really, it can get really maddening,
hmm and
you
people
know.
will want it to fit. It's like they start seeming like they're trying to hammer a square peg into a round hole to get all these gods to fit into one framework. And you're like, well,
Yeah.
or maybe there's multiple. And they're like, no.
Yeah, well, well, one of the things that I think is very interesting is something it was something that Alan Moore pointed out, which leads to it, the idea being that there's a largely psychological component to all of this,
Mhm.
which is, he is like, a fake god will do.
That's true. That's true. And that's why I can't avoid the psychological elements of it, because I know that some part of it is psychological. I just
Yeah, it
don't know if
must
all of it
be.
is.
Yeah. It's like at least part of it is, it must be, because like it's an experience that people have in their own minds.
Well, I'm
So
practicing
almost
something
by
now
definition.
that's similar to what shamanism would say is journeying. And there's a shamanistic practice called soul retrieval, where you're supposed to journey, which is, if you're familiar with astral travel, it's a similar idea.
Yeah.
It could also be considered just meditative imagining and allowing your mind to go where it wants to go, however you want to look at it. But the process is with soul retrieval is to go into your mind and to look for a lost piece of you. And the idea is that your soul has fragmented and a piece has become separate. And then when you find it, you need to embrace it for whatever it was and love it again and pull it back in. And then it will reform with you. And what I've found doing this is every time I've done this, I've found a repressed memory that I didn't know about my childhood. So
Ooh,
I can tell you for a
interesting.
fact that this process works
And have you and
because
if you
I'm
can
getting
and if you
results.
confirmed that those
Yeah,
memories have happened? Oh
you reach
man.
out to people and find out, yeah, that has happened to you. And it's just like,
Oh.
wow. And so I can confirm that doing this practice will work. But can I confirm that it's definitely 100% psychological or not? It sounds that way,
Yeah.
but it's
It
one of the
definitely has that
oldest
effect.
practices of the occult. You're going back to
Yeah.
shamanistic roots instead of that's the
Yeah.
beginning.
That's even that's pre-logos,
Hmm.
you
So
know.
that's really interesting. But here's where it gets really weird is that some of these soul shards, for lack of a better way to say it, have been things that I've talked to before and just not known what they were that I thought were entities. So I'm like, okay.
Oh.
And so to me, I was like, all right, well, this leans me towards psychological. Except then you have that weird element where I've had these same shards talk to other people separately. Well, now I know that's a shard of me. So how did that happen?
Yeah.
Is
It's like,
there some kind of a psychic link between me and someone I don't know about now, or do these things actually take on an existence of their own?
yeah.
It's just one
I
of those.
have
It's maddening
I
when you're
have
trying to put it together.
no I have nothing to go on
Right.
except pure imagination here.
Yeah.
But it's been a theory I've been playing with for a while, and it's wacky as shit. Like it
Yep.
is out there. This is, if I was to say this was a truth, I would be justifiably institutionalized.
I feel
You
like a lot
know?
of my current theories are there as well. The ones that I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
necessarily share online.
Yeah. Like, but one of my theories, actually, you know what? Before I tell you that, I wanted to bring up something because I've been reading like
Mm,
Jan Corpus Hermeticus again. One of the things that the father
mhm,
points out now to for everyone listening at home, um, the Corpus Hermeticus is written much like Plato's The Republic in that it uses the convention of two people having a conversation. And in this one, it is an entity who is referred to as the divine Pymander.
mhm.
And it is couched in terms of a father talking to his son. You know, now the other thing you have to realize, which I don't think a lot of people understand, is that the Hermetic tradition is deeply Christian.
Mhm.
Deeply Christian. Like, but we're talking like Christianity before the days of Augustine, like way before.
Mhm.
And one of the things it says is all the wisdom you gain, keep it veiled. Don't tell anyone.
Mhm.
And you're like, why?
Yes, exactly.
You're like, why? And it explains. It's like they're gonna think you're crazy and they're gonna
Mhm.
hang you.
Yep. Yeah. So you always have
You
to be
know?
careful.
Yeah. And I found myself, so I did this thing that I usually do when I come across like a moral quandary. Because that feels like advice rather than,
Yeah, I don't
if
think
you
it's a
want to
rule.
truly understand the power,
Right.
like, this seems like, yeah, don't tell anyone you know how to do this. They'll fucking, like, life will go bad for you.
Hmm.
But I found myself thinking thusly, which is every time we enter an age of, there are two things that seem to happen regularly whenever I go back to the occult. One, obsession with words reaches an all-time high,
Hmm.
usually in the form of political correctness,
Hmm.
because I consider political correctness to be political magical thinking.
Hmm.
Like, In every way you could possibly interpret that statement, I think it is true.
That's true.
Because it's the idea that the words themselves change reality.
Hmm.
You know, it's like if you call them this and not that, then we will reach towards the great goal of equality and not having anyone having privileges that others don't have, or, you know,
Right.
some other such thing. And I always find myself going, yeah, but the problem is this is the real world.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like I'm my opinion is people are like, are words magical? And I'm like, yes, absolutely, words are magical, but here's the thing, I think people overestimate their magical potential.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know, like at the end of the day, they are still words. You
Hmm.
know, and you also have to remember that a one body of thought that was obsessed with the power of words split into three major groups, and it took 2,000 years for one of them to develop.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
we had the letter of the law itself, and then several thousand years later, someone came up with the idea of the spirit of the law.
Hmm.
You know, and that in my opinion is Christianity. Christianity was the idea that the spirit of the word was more important than the word itself,
Right.
which is why for the longest time Christians didn't write anything down because it was considered to be heretical.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, like, oh, you're trying to be a Jew about it, for a better way of putting it.
Right.
You're writing it down, or you're making a law code. Oh, you're trying to be a Muslim. You
Right.
know, like, what the hell's wrong with you? You know, and but at the end of the day, there is a resurgence of the idea that words somehow manipulate reality. The other thing that comes with it is that it's usually a time of either immense stagnation or immense chaos.
Hmm.
You know, and then it seems like there is this kind of collective spirit of man looks towards the occult during those periods,
Yeah.
either to shake things up or to make some sort of sense out of the madness that is going on around them.
Yeah. I could see that. The thing is that I do believe that words do have power, but they don't work the way that they think.
Exactly. You know,
So you know,
um,
you can use if you control your own vocabulary, you can change things about yourself. But that's taking charge of yourself, which is different than having someone else try to force it on you.
yeah, exactly.
And when you do that, you're in alignment with what you want and what you say, and then it works.
Yeah. Then things tend to go the way you think they should go.
Right.
But the minute you start trying to force people or telling people, no, this is the way you should think about it, that's always the biggest mistake, because
Right. Because now it's
the
you're
minute
repressing.
someone tells you
Hmm.
this is how you should think about it is the minute someone goes, fuck you,
Right.
and
Yeah.
resists in
And so
that
now,
instant.
as much as words have power, thoughts have power too. But now you're giving emotion and energy to those thoughts that
Hmm.
before you probably didn't think twice about. And so now those thoughts have
Yeah.
double the power of the words. So you're using different words, but
Yeah.
you know, you kind of by restricting what people say, you kind of just exacerbate the problem instead of you know, that's how I look at it. And I think it's
Yeah.
people trying to control it and just not quite understanding that element.
Well, yeah, I always point people when we're talking about like the magic words. I always point people towards the bardic tradition.
Hmm.
You know, and telling people like, oh, what's the deal with the bard? And I'm like, well, bard is another word for a magician.
Hmm.
You know, but they were considered, but it's a European tradition. It's a Western European tradition, that said, hey, you know, words seem to have power. We believe
Right.
in words. And of course, because a lot of it was in Ireland, they saw a connection between words
Hmm.
and synchronicity,
Yeah.
and they just called it fate.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
or as I like to tell everybody, the weird.
Hmm. Yep.
You know, it's the weird.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, what does weird mean? I was like, well, you have to understand that weird actually in the original context carried the connotation of fate or destiny.
Hmm.
And they're like, but can't it also be translated into word? And I'm like, exactly. They saw a
Right.
connection.
Yeah.
You know, there was for them, for the Irish, there was a connection between the word and the manipulation of fate.
Hmm. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and that's part of the whole psychological view of what we call self-transformation, which really that makes it sound more grand than it is. Self-transformation is just it's sort of like self-help, except take it on a spiritual level as well, and
well, it's I've
and
always considered it.
also life hacking sort of in a way, like mind hacking of your
Yeah,
own mind.
like yeah, it's like self-help, but the problem is that self-help is kind of,
Right.
it's not
It has the
always
wrong connotation.
wrong.
Right.
Yeah, the self-help is not always wrong, but the problem is often that it's so watered down it doesn't help you as well as it
Right.
should.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
so
whereas if you do it through things which are meaningful to you
exactly.
personally, they
Yeah.
have a lot more power.
And that's how self-transformation works, is you're using your own correspondences, your own psychological viewpoints to affect the way you behave by changing your language, by changing the way you think, by changing those type of things. But unlike these kind of oppressive ways to view it, there's not some list of how you should think or how you should speak. It's up to the individual practitioner to say, what about my life do I not like, and what about my life do I like? And I'm going to put
Yeah,
more emphasis on thinking about and speaking about this and less emphasis on doing it over here, and you'll find your entire life shifts in that direction. And that's part of the whole magic thing. That's why it
yeah,
could be considered psychological from that viewpoint, because it works, but it does work in a way that seems almost incomprehensible to some people, because if you do it
yeah.
enough, it works really, really well.
Yeah, and that's where like the really freaky shit happens, and you're always riding, you're always running that, walking that
Hmm.
razor's
Yeah.
edge, you know. And I think the reality is it always feels like that when you're right at the border between the known and the unknown.
Yeah.
Like I imagine the people who trailblazed chemistry probably felt very much the same,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, because they were like, yeah, why else would you have this like obsession with creating a system that would
Hmm.
check itself? You
Right.
know, you're like, we got this result. What did you in Spain get? They're like, we also got that result. Okay, what does England say?
Right.
All right, we also got that result. Okay, then we can say that this is true.
Right. Yeah.
You know, enough of us have said it is true, have found had the same finding. So obviously, it must be true. It's not culturally relative. We're not making it up.
Right.
You know, yeah. And then someone will come up with another question, and then they devise another experiment. You know, they're
Yep.
like, "Ooh, maybe." You know, and of course, like the vast majority of hypotheses that have ever been put forth have been proven incorrect,
Right.
but they did lead towards the correct
Right. And
answer.
that's the process. And I think that's how it is
Yeah,
when you're doing magic too, is if you find a doorway in, whether it's through the psychological model or spiritual model or whatever, and it starts to work for you, well, now you're experimenting. Now you're like the scientists. You can't say that's definitely the reason it's working, but now you have a working model. And that
yeah.
puts you in there, and then you build from that your own hypothesis, which is all I would ever ask of anybody, because I don't know it all at all. I'm just giving you
Yeah.
a framework that worked for me. That's it. And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
still learning.
I always warn people. I was like, if someone tells you that they have the absolute answer, they're lying.
Exactly.
You know, they're lying,
Well, I
and
get people that ask me on my channel what I think about the afterlife, and I always have to preface it by saying I have no idea, but here's what I think. Because
yeah,
it's not something that I believe we could know until we're dead. And even if you've had an out of body experience and you're 100% sure it was real, you're the only person who's ever going to know that. You
yeah,
can't give that to someone else. And as a result, I can't take those testimonies as anything more than, well, that could be real. So
yeah,
always got to be that nobody actually knows, but
yeah.
here's what I think.
Even a lot of this is a thing that always like breaks my brain. Even a lot of what we know to be science is taken by most people on faith.
Yeah, that's true.
Like now, to be fair, it is a faith that has been tested again and again and again and again and again,
Yeah.
so that we can provisionally say, all right, it's a fact.
Right.
But still, you have to take it on faith in order to ask the next question.
And that's the thing is scientific theories. People will get angry when you say that theories aren't proven because theories take all this speculation. They take a lot of research before they become a real scientific theory. They're not like
Yeah.
the theories I come up with. But uh, theories have been disproven by science before,
Yeah.
and then a new one takes its place. And they are stepping stones in finding the real thing. And so I always look at a scientific theory as our best guess at current.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, like those found by science, like I said, those found by science, they're really good.
Mm-hmm.
They're really fucking reliable.
They're probably better than what I'm going to come up with. So it's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, exactly.
Like it's fine to take it on faith, but you are still taking it on faith that at least for now this is what we believe.
Yeah.
It isn't like a proven fact. And
Yeah,
that
think of all those
yeah.
scientists that were working on the purely Newtonian model.
Mm-hmm.
And then along hundreds of years later comes along this guy called Einstein who comes up with this concept of relativity. And then all of a sudden half of Newton, not all, but half of Newton has to be thrown out.
Right. And that's the thing too, is that anything you were working on a normal day-to-day scale, like this chair, that wall, whatever, it worked on that. You didn't need a different model than that. So you had no way to know that it was different than that. So it seemed, that at the time that makes the most sense to everything you're going to interact with. It's just once you got to another level, you're like, oh wait, we got to revise this. And you can see this even just going from like high school physics to college level physics. You learn these like constant variables in high school. They're like, oh yeah, this is a constant and that's a constant. And then you go into a college level physics class and they're like, oh, there's actually an equation for that whole area there. That was just a black box to make it easy for you.
Yeah. It's the magic box.
Yeah.
And everything in like everything from physics to like higher mathematics has that idea of like, all right, so we explained it to you like that. All right, now let's crack open the magic box and show you how that's a vast oversimplification.
And a lot of times there's another magic box in that box that's just like, well, we still don't know how to calculate this part. You're like, well, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
It's like, well, everything we build works if we put a 5 in there. So for now, that's what we're doing. But we don't know if that number changes in some other way, if we're in some other place.
Yeah. Like there's this great in video game development, there is this equation that is referred to as the black number.
Yeah.
Have you heard about this?
I've vaguely heard about it.
Yeah, the black number is the most efficient way to calculate three-dimensional models.
Mm-hmm.
It works better than anything else, and it was discovered by John Carmack.
Mm-hmm.
One of the guys who made Doom.
Right.
And like my brother worked at the same company as him for a while, and he's like, it is so weird talking to that guy because he's like, how you always have that scene where you've got like the apprentice and he's listening to like the master wizard and he says something and then you're just sort of like, what? Wait, no, go back. I have no idea. I have no frame of reference whatsoever.
Right.
He's like, that's like talking. That's always how John Carmack is when you talk to him.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I'm just sort of like, okay, so what you're telling me is that as far as you're concerned, he's like, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, he is literally a wizard of 3D graphics.
Yeah, right.
And and I thought it was really funny that they referred to it as the black number.
Yeah. And I mean, sticking with that theme, you've got dark energy and dark matter that we talk about now, which it's a black box as well. We don't know what that is. They just say, based on these equations, the whole universe can only be doing this if there's something causing this to happen. So it looks like it would be some kind of energy, so dark energy. And this other thing only works if there's more matter than we thought, but we don't see that matter, so we'll call it dark matter.
Dark matter. Yeah.
That's it. That's all that is.
A vast oversimplification just so you can get people to understand what you're talking about and get them to the next level if they want to go there.
And it helps because if you just said, well, there could be any number of components we don't know about that make up that mass, people will be like, oh, how many variables is it? It's like, no, we don't know. So you just put one there that's just the unknown, and that's dark matter.
Yeah,
It's like one day we'll
yeah.
find out that there's 237 different things that are involved in that. But
Most likely, because like I was baking everyone's brain the other day with the things that we know about black holes.
hmm
That we know largely mathematically, but it's one of those, as this one guy says, all right, so here's the first thing you got to understand about a black hole is that at the dead center, time stops.
that's the part that trips me out.
I know. You're like, what do you mean time stops? And it's like, it stops. And you're like, how does it stop? It's like, well, you realize that time is related to space,
Right.
right? And I'm like, um, okay, it is. And they're like, yeah. What's the relationship? They're like, we don't know.
Right.
But the farther stretched space gets, the more extended time becomes relative to it.
Right.
And you're like, wait, space stretches? And they're like, all the time.
Right. Yeah.
What?
Because our frame of reference is only on this planet.
Yeah.
We just have
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, we
So-
just have time because, like, our time relative to anyone else's time is 1-to-1.
Right.
But if we were to compare our time to, like, another planet, it might be different.
Especially the further out you go.
Yeah. Yeah, especially like the closer to the rim, the rim of the perceivable universe you get. And the other concept that always freaked me out was the realization that we have to refer to it as the perceivable universe.
Right.
And I'm like, why do we have to refer to it as that? It's like, it's because this is the amount of distance that a light created at the time we estimate the Big Bang
That it could
could
have
have
traveled.
possibly have gotten.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, so that's the perceivable universe. They're like, as far as we know.
And then you're also realizing that the
Yeah.
things you see have a timestamp somehow. Because if
Yes.
you can look at the farthest away thing we can see, you're looking at its original creation, I guess, at the beginning of time, according to that theory.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or
So you're looking at a
X
planet,
many years old.
right? But you're
It's
looking
like
at a
X
planet
many
that might not
millions of
even
years old.
actually be there anymore.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like,
the light may no longer
yeah,
be, the light's just now reaching us, but the source as long as it's gone.
right.
And
All
I
of that stuff, really.
really, yeah, I really freaked myself out when they made the announcement that they finally made the announcement. They're like, we know what gravity is.
Right.
And I'm like, really? Because everyone knew what people were talking about when they
Right.
talked about gravity, but no one knew what it was.
Right. Yeah.
Because they couldn't figure out how it related to anything. But then they found something. They
hmm
figured it out, and that answer was mass.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
It's like the more mass something has, the more gravity it creates. It's like, well, wait, why aren't heavy things pulled towards heavier things on a planet? It's like because it's all relative, so everything's just being pulled towards a planet.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, wait, what? It's like, so is it a force? Or like, no, it's an aspect of space.
Right. Yeah. A lot of
You
things turn
know,
out to be an aspect of space. That's the crazy thing.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
black hole thing, what always got me was that you never reach the center. Like if you were to fall
yeah,
into a black hole, you will never reach the center. And so I'm like,
yeah.
well, what's at the center? And it's like
We
nothing.
don't know something. They think something,
Everything,
but they
nothing, I
don't
don't know.
know. Yeah, yeah. It's like I was saying. Like, yeah. So time stops, and while you're reaching it, going in faster than the speed of light. By the way,
hmm
but the reason that happens is because space is compacting, but it reaches a point where it compacts infinitely, and so all of a sudden you can't get any further,
Right.
but there's still distance to go, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh my god,
And it's like
how
you're still
how
within time, but at such a small fraction that it's got this infinite number of zeros before the one, which means you'll never get there. But the next step is no time, and you can't get there, which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And this has led to the theory that they're like, well, what's the Big Bang?
Yeah.
And a lot of them currently think, well, we think that the Big Bang is the introduction of time within three-dimensional
Hmm.
space. And you're
Yeah.
like, the introduction of time, and they're like, yeah, time is the mechanism that makes the universe work.
Right.
And you're like, well, you're acting like it's a physical thing, and they're like, well, we're starting to figure out that it
Right.
is.
Yeah. It makes more sense if you understand it as a physical thing for these super, super small things and super, super large views. But
Yeah,
here on the
yeah.
planet, it doesn't make any sense to look at it that way.
Yeah, no, it doesn't, because it will never affect us, because
Right.
one of the things they're pretty sure of is that even though it creates time, we as human beings only move one way through it.
Right. Yeah. So
You
it's like
know, it
we can start to see the effects at that level and be like, oh wait, it's not what we thought it was, but we will still continue to experience it this way no matter what.
yeah, no matter what happens. Just like, oh, okay, so what happens when this universe shuts down?
Hmm.
They're like,
That's kind of how
something
this that's
else.
kind of how this psychological and spiritual stuff is too. I've the way that I've accepted it and moved forward, and it's helped me a lot in my practices. I just decide it doesn't matter. And you have to do that in the moment.
Yeah,
I go, okay, I'm going to go into my trance state. I'm going to do my work. And while I'm there, I'm just going to assume the spiritual model because it works easier that way. I'm going to assume everything is real. But when I come back and I write it in my journal, then I'm going to analyze it from a psychological model and see what I can pull from that. And
ooh,
that allows me to look at it both ways. But there's never a point where I'm able to make the distinction that like, yes, it definitely is one or the other. And sometimes I'm pulled toward, and again, it sounds like a crackpot theory, but I'm pulled toward the idea that it's both, which I can't fully conceive of how that works, but yet I also kind of can. So I'm like, somehow
yeah,
it's both at once.
it's yeah, it's what's really weird. Like, so the reason I went through that whole like time and space thing,
Hmm.
which is the only thing that I can think of that actually makes things like this kind of make sense.
Right.
And by the way, it doesn't really make it make sense.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
just all I've got. Um, is the idea that our our minds, our consciousness, the the little the information that is stored in our brain as opposed to the brain itself is a kind of projection from another dimension
Right.
onto the third.
Right.
um this would kind of explain a lot of the weird phenomena that a lot of people experience when dealing with, say, these weird entities, quote
Sure.
unquote.
Yeah. And I
you
mean, from a
know
hermetic standpoint, that matches up too. So if you follow the hermetic principles, the first one is everything is mental.
yeah,
And that's kind of the idea that, we're all part of this kind of one mind, we're all one thing, but experiencing itself through different lenses, different bodies and whatever. But once you go into
yeah,
that, that takes a leap of faith because we can't prove that. But if you accept
yeah,
that, then all of a sudden your psychology becoming physical entities is makes just as much sense as anything else because your mind is kind of
yeah,
everyone's mind and you're all kind of sharing a mind just not realizing it, so anything you conceive of pops into reality, but that gets you into this weird space when you do that of what the hell does that actually mean, like how does that practically work? Like I can conceptually understand this theory, but
yeah. What's the actual application of
right.
it?
And so
How do you even begin to test for something like that?
right. I mean, because the very foundation of it assumes that what we think about the mind is completely wrong and throws it out the window first.
Yeah,
Like, well, that's
yeah,
already a giant leap. But when you look at it from that model, which is how some of the ancients did, you can say, okay, well, that would support the idea that psychological and real are one and the same, that we've just made a distinction. We try to say
yeah,
certain things are real or aren't real when everything is real from that point of view. It would mean that even anytime you've imagined something random, that somewhere in space that's real because everything is thought, including your body. We just don't
Yeah.
realize that we're imagined as well in that theory.
Yeah. It's like it's and the big weirdness there is, of course you think about it, you're like, well, of course I'm physical, right?
Right.
I can touch myself, I can feel it, I can touch this desk, and you're just sort of like, yeah, you are real, definitely in that sense,
Hmm.
but how do you know when you're dreaming? How do you know?
Right.
Because don't the things in dreams have similar properties?
Hmm.
Even
Yeah,
if they're a little like muddied, don't they also have properties? A wall is still a wall,
right. And if you do
you
lucid
know?
dreaming, you can see there are ways to kind of prove to yourself you're in a dream, where you
Yeah,
might be able to count your fingers and then close them and open them and see if it's a different number and things like that. And so
yeah,
we can prove that in a dream it's a little more fluid, but it's only a little more fluid than it is here.
yeah. You still find yourself wondering, like, it's one of those, like, is this just purely the world of the imagination?
Hmm.
If so, why are there rules? Does the imagination have rules?
Right.
You know?
That's interesting. It's just and when you do any of this trance type of work, you do any of this journeying or what people call astral projection or anything else, you see those same type of rules, the same type of rules that work in dreams and the imagination come into play, but you're no longer necessarily in control of it the way you would when you're just daydreaming. So you're like, I'm back in
Yeah,
this
yeah,
weird
yeah. A
dreamlike
lot
state.
of people, understand lucid dreaming as like, oh, I can control the dream, and I always find myself, no, 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 no,
And
no,
not
no, no,
always.
no, no, not always. You just are aware.
You're where you're dreaming.
You're aware you're dreaming, and that's it. That's the big distinction.
I found
You
it gives
know,
me a degree of control. Like I might be able to do a few things that I wasn't able to do in the dream before, but it isn't like full mastery of the dream.
yeah. I've yet to achieve anything approaching that. For me, it's always just understanding that I am in a dream, and about the best thing I can do is determine which way I walk.
Yeah. I
You
find
know,
that when and maybe it's because I've had a lot of lucid dreams more recently being involved in some of this, but I find when I get lucid, because you can't really control when it happens aside from you can kind of increase your hit ratio, but
yeah,
you don't really control what nights it happens. But when you realize you're lucid, usually I'm like, okay, if I go lucid, I'm gonna try something. I never do that when that happens. I go lucid in the dream and I'm interested in where the dream was going. And so I suddenly start analyzing the dream instead. I'm like, I wonder what this dream means about me, because that's how my brain works anyway. And then I want
yeah,
to see where it was going, so I continue doing what was going to happen in the dream and
yeah.
allowing it to just do whatever. And so I always end up waking up later like I still didn't test if when I'm lucid I could do anything because I got too interested in my own psyche to to try
Yeah,
that
yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah. I always try to manifest my desires in the dream, and it
Hmm.
never quite works.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I want to dream of this. Ugh.
Yeah.
Nope. Okay.
But I always think that's
Arr.
interesting to analyze. So I keep a dream journal. I'll write my dreams down, but I do it because I want to see recurring imagery. I want to see if I go to bed thinking something, if it comes into the dream, like stuff like that's interesting to me. And one thing I've found is that if I'm lucid and I'm trying to do something in a dream and it comes out different, a lot of times if I analyze that metaphorically, it'll relate to something in my life. Like that's how I really believe
Oh.
things should work or whatever. It's like, oh, I'm going to try to fly in a dream, but I can't because something. It's like, well, that something is something about my own psyche. It's something about how I look at that. So that you can learn a
Ah.
little bit about yourself and I always think, learning about the self is a big part of all of this too.
Yeah. Oh, Sean Murphy is talking about this. I described this one dream to the stream at one point, which I looked at, and this was, how sometimes you'll have a dream and you'll go, "This is prophetic."
Yeah. Yep.
This was one of those. And in that, I knew exactly, even in the dream, I knew exactly what was going on,
Hmm.
because one of the most important, one of the most consistently important tarot cards to my life has always been the Tower.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
It's
you
not a
know,
great one
like,
to keep getting it up.
oh no. No, it's rough. It is fucking rough to keep
Mhm.
like drawing the tower
Right.
because, you know, it's like on the one hand, it's like if you really look at it, you're like, wow, if you're a magician and you analyze the tower, you're like, you must have a lot of secret knowledge.
Mhm.
And it's the answer I'm always like is yes, but the problem is my world keeps falling apart.
Exactly. Right. Yep.
You know, it's like there's definitely a point where you're like, could I relinquish the key of life for a little bit more stability? Could I trade this in?
Right.
No. All right.
Like, oh,
Okay,
we've got to do
fine.
another Dark Night of the Soul, huh? Great.
Yeah, we got to do this again. And this was one of those. And, you know, I was in this tower. It was falling apart. There was a sense that it was a building that was constructed out of 4 pillars.
Hmm.
But it wasn't like literally within the dream. It was just like that feeling,
Yeah.
you know. And I had been going for a while on this wacky path. One of the things that was said to me in the dream, which I never deciphered, which was there's this old Chinese guy. Like part of it was having dinner with my family in a food Chinese restaurant, Panda
Hmm.
Express style food court that was at the base of this tower as it is crumbling. My family is having a like family reunion dinner, which I found myself immediately accepting because I'm just sort of like, well, my family did live through the destruction of an entire nation like
Right.
twice.
Right.
So the idea that they just be like, tower's falling, whatever, here, have some chow fun. Fuck is wrong with you? Chill out, be okay. You know, was it kind of made sense.
Right.
But there was this weird guy there that was definitely, for lack of a better way of putting it, was at the very least a dream figment.
Right.
You know, because I'm like, I've never seen a guy like this in the waking world. But he is very obviously representative of like, you know, like old Chinese soothsayer,
Hmm.
you know, very studied man. And he looks at me and he goes, when were you born? And I give him the year and he's like, no. What time? And I'm like, oh, I was born at 9:30 a.m. And he's like, that's what they told you? And I was like, yeah. They're like, they lied to you. You were born at midnight. And I'm like, what? All right. First of all, this is part of my brain is, and I just keep thinking about that. And I keep going, what the fuck does that even mean?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like, why would something say that to me? Because I had always just assumed that when my parents said, yeah, you're born at 9:30 in the morning on, you know, this date, why would they lie?
Right.
You know, and actually, what something I should do is I probably should ask my actual dad.
Yeah.
You know,
See what
it's
he
like, was
says.
I actually born at 9:30 or was I born at some other time? And you covered it up because you're Chinese and you're super fucking stitious. You know, because I could fucking see that. I could actually see that. They'd be like, yeah, we told you it was 9:30 because being born at midnight is considered very unlucky.
Yeah, right.
You know, something like that. Something like that. I could see that. I should actually ask him. But the incident that Sean Murphy was talking about was I run into this guy and it's the image of like, you know, kind of fat guy. He's sitting in
Hmm.
a golden seat. He's just reclining, and I go in and I am like, all right, what do you got here? And he's like, what's that? And he points to these green smiley face prayer beads, which in the dream I had gotten from Yogi.
Hmm.
And I'm like, well, these are the prayer beads of Yogi. And he goes, his sect. All they do is sell mystical tchotchkes. Only my sect can sell you. Oh God, what do you refer to? Only my sect can sell you religious pornography.
Hmm.
And I'm like, what? Not that I'm not interested in religious pornography, because believe me, I am. But why would I forsake my friend's gift for that? And he's just sort of like, and he stays silent And he's just like, whatever. And I'm like, you know what? I think I'll stick to the beads my friend gave me. Thank you very much. They're probably more powerful in my hands anyway. And I described that to Yogi, and he's like, is he a guy? Does he have a turban on? You know, like, but it's not quite a turban. I'm like, yeah. He's like, all right, he's sitting in a gold chair, right? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, is it square? And I'm like, it is square. He's like, does it have a lot of inscriptions on it? And I'm like, yeah, it did. And he's like, yeah, okay. That is specifically a Maharaja. I was like, wait, there's actually a word for that? A dude who does that? He's like, yep, there is. And I'm like,
that's awesome.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
and that was one of the weird things where I'm like, I didn't have any inkling that was a real thing.
That's the best thing about knowing other people involved in this too, because I only talk about on my channel really stuff that I've experienced, because I don't want to try to take other people's things and present them. And I also will present things that are in books and things like that I can back up sources.
Right.
And say so and so said this. And that's kind of the stance I take it from. But if people knew what some of the people I've worked with have told me about things, they'd be like, man, this is far more interesting than your channel. You know, but it's just that.
Yeah, but it gets.
So I'm not gonna share that stuff on my channel. But
yeah, because it gets out there. It gets really out there.
Yeah, and it's exactly that type of experience where I said, well, I was talking to somebody once, and I was like, I think I visited the underworld, and the Babylonian underworld, and I started describing it, and then they started giving me some more, and I was like, well, yeah, but wait, how do you know that? And then again, this is where you get into that. How is it psychological completely if we're both seeing the same thing, unless minds are shared somehow, or
yeah. Unless maybe we just, when you're in a culture together, you share imagery,
right?
And being in America,
but it's still very
weird
specific.
Cultural convergence point. Yeah, it is. Like, that's the weird part.
And so it's like they're like, oh yeah, I know where you were, and you're like, well, how is that possible? You know?
Yeah. Like, me and Yogi had that where I'm describing, like, I'm, on one journey, I meet the spiritual mother, like, in her home, in her in her, what I assume to be divine form. And, I go in, and he's like, well, as you're walking in, are there marble columns, aren't there? And I'm like, there were marble columns. And he's like, yeah. It was definitely that moment of, okay,
right. And
why did that happen? Is there even a meaning to that?
Those are the moments for us that give us that, okay, there's something else to it. But then you go to tell people about it, and you're like, I have no way to prove this to you, because you would have had to hear our conversation in the order I had it to even know the way we were going back and forth,
Yeah. Like, you have to, because, like, a third person has to just trust the other two,
right?
And that's a lot to ask,
especially with this stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah, especially his stuff with that's really perceptual, and other people could very obviously go like, well, you guys are both high, maybe just something weird happened, and you just conflated it. And it's like, well, maybe, but I'm open to that interpretation.
Yeah,
absolutely. But there was a line that do you know who John Lilly was? John Lilly was the guy that Altered States was based on.
Okay.
So he was the guy who was convinced he could talk to dolphins. Psychological researcher. And one of the things that he had, this dude, he was like a schizophrenic guy that he was friends with, who showed up at an event where John Lilly was talking here in San Francisco, and I went and saw him. The thing that immediately struck me about John Lilly is that he actually looked like a human dolphin a little bit. he had this very, like, beaky kind of snout, and it was like, he kind of looks like a dolphin if dolphins had evolved into humans,
right? Yeah,
which I thought was really funny. The other thing I thought was really funny about him, like, he was around in a wheelchair, but he's like, what, like 80 or something. Still smoked. And you just just outside, like, just smoking. Like, whatever, the reason I'm in this wheelchair is gonna get me before the smoking does, like that kind of thing. And this schizophrenic friend of his, like, told this story where John was asking him, Dr. Lilly was asking him to recount his experiences on LSD. And the guy is, like, talking about it. And all of a sudden, one of the other researchers in the room goes, "That's bullshit. That's complete bullshit." And all of a sudden, and the dude goes, like, and then John said something that was really important to me, which was, he stood up, he turned around, and he goes, "Maybe, but I think it's some bullshit you need to be examining."
Yep.
That's how I feel about a lot of this. I don't know
Yeah.
what is fact from what is pure fabrication. All I know is that I would like nothing more than to be able to separate them.
Yeah,
to
that's
figure that
exactly how
out.
I feel about it too. And I think, that's the part of me that wants science to take it a little more seriously and go into it. I understand why they don't.
Oh,
Like, I
yeah.
get that. But it's the part of me that's like, man, we need research teams on this stuff and whatever. And I'm not really the person to do it. I'm just a guy fumbling around in the dark, then telling people what I experienced for the hope that they'll try a little bit and report on their experience. And as the word gets out, maybe someone who does have the credentials to study this will take an interest. But
Yeah.
I see that there's something that works that we don't understand and doesn't have a currently explainable model outside of what the occult is showing it to be. So
Yeah, yeah. It's very strange because, like, the other thing that's kind of maddening about it is that the traditions between the Eastern and Western Hemisphere are so very different. And I find the Hindu faith to be really important, but because they're kind of a convergence point between the two.
yeah, yeah,
Like Chinese Taoism is really different from Hermeticism. It's really different.
yeah. But it sounds a lot like what any of these entities will tell you.
Yeah, it
You read
does,
it and you're
doesn't
like,
it?
wait, what does that mean? That's
Yeah.
exactly how it is when you're talking
Yeah,
to them.
it's like there's the way, there's the way things are, there's the way things should be.
Right.
You're like, all right then. You know, that's odd. One of the things I thought was really interesting is, in my own abyssal experiences, I'm always on a column. It's never, it's not always made of the same stuff, but it's always the sensation of being on a column or a mesa that is really super vertical. And it's like, look over the edge, what do you see? And it's like darkness. It's like, what's in the darkness? And it's always something.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes it's a giant snake, sometimes it's a shark, sometimes just something like that, like like that there be dragons.
Yeah, exactly. And
you
it makes
know
me wonder, like, is that kind of a safe space? Is that how you create in your mind, like, I'm okay here and I'm looking in?
I don't know.
'Cause I
I
don't know.
don't know, because it's one of the things that's really weird about every time I deal with it is everything is always utter darkness, but I can always see.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need, it's weird. It's like I don't really need to create a light source for myself. I can just see. And that was always odd.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, for me, like I
Yeah.
said, I had to kind of like bring about this light, but I didn't actually create something. And in previous astral travel, I would just create things because you can kind of imagine things and they just show up. But in
Yeah.
this, it was like it didn't seem like that was an option so much. So for some reason, and so it was just I had to radiate this ability to see, but I still was limited. I wasn't just seeing like you would see. So
Yeah.
it's a
One of
really
the
cool talent to have.
Yeah, I have to ask, are you a painter or artist at all?
I write. I used to write fiction, and then I have a bunch of written fiction that I've never published. But I
Got it.
found that through the process of writing, I was able to learn so much about myself and things, and that kind of led me into a lot of this as well, because it's that self-actualization
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
process.
It's that weird, really, really odd connection between magical activity and art.
Hmm.
Which gets really strange, and the relationship is not really clear.
Yeah, and I
You
play
know.
with music. I'm not what I wouldn't consider myself a musician or anything by any standard, but I play with mixing stuff and things like that. And I find that when I listen back to things that I've made, it can have a meaning to me that again
Yeah,
can kind of show things about your mood, your who you are, all kinds of things. Sometimes a piece of music will better explain my feelings than I could with words.
yeah. I mean, like, this really weird thing happened. Like, I need to get back to it at some point, but obviously there are other things I need to do first. You know, the demands of the material world are
Right.
kind of imminent.
Right.
You know, they're like, you got deadlines. It's like, well, but I really want to hang out over here and just go into this
Yeah.
weird
Yeah.
space for a while. It's like, you got bills to pay. The hell's wrong with you?
Right.
You're like, okay, fine. But I had been doing this painting and I wasn't exactly sure what it was. And I'm
Hmm.
like, it started out as a painting of one thing, turned into something else. And by the end of it, I was like, this is a really weird interpretation of this thing that I was doing.
Hmm.
It's really, really weird. And I all of a sudden, you know, months later, going through this weird experience. And then even like weeks later, I actually look at the painting again because I'm like, all right, well, let's see what we can do here.
Hmm.
I have some time. I look at it and I'm just sort of like, oh shit, that's not a painting of the thing. That's a painting of me.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like you're just like, oh crap,
If you
what is
have
going
these realizations at any point, then you'll know exactly what that feeling is.
Yeah,
But that's another one that's
yeah,
hard to explain.
yeah. It's really hard to explain, you know. But like, one a filmmaker that I always loved, even though I'm like, here's the thing about his movies, they are insane, but they're beautiful, and you can tell that unlike a lot of really, really pretentious art house filmmakers, this guy's onto something, even if it's just about him.
Yeah.
Is Alejandro Jodorowsky. That guy's on another fucking level. And have you ever seen the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune?
Mm-mm.
Oh, I recommend it. I recommend it. Like, the thing that's really interesting about it is most of the occult filmmakers of the last like 20 years, you know, since he's been active essentially, um, show up in this documentary. Like Richard Stanley shows up in the documentary, you know, the guy who did Hardware.
Hmm.
And they're all like, the guy's a genius, he's a visionary, blah, blah, blah. They say nice things about him. And they get to a point where they're like, he's describing why he wanted to do an adaptation of Dune.
Right.
And you find yourself going, that's not the talk of a director, that's the talk of a sorcerer.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, where he's like, I want to bring make a movie which is God, and you're like,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, a movie that it will itself be a literal divine experience,
Yep.
and you're like, no wonder they stopped you.
Yeah.
That's no wonder they stopped you, man. It's like, I wish you had succeeded. But at the other hand, I understand why they stopped you, because the minute you start saying that shit, everyone's like, how many millions of dollars do I have invested in this? Like, okay.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, but he wanted to make a movie that was a divine
Right.
experience. And, you know, but unlike Holy Mountain, which he was like, this describes the divine experience, the process of it. Have you ever seen Holy Mountain?
Mm-mm.
Oh my
Another one to
God,
watch.
you need to watch Jodorowsky's Holy Mountain. It is amazing. But the thing that's really neat about all of his films is they're really goofy.
Mm-hmm.
At every point, which is why I identified with them.
Right.
Because I always had this saying, which is like, which was, enlightenment is the most profound and most retarded thing you will ever experience. It's the dumbest thing ever, because the thing that causes you to understand is never going to be, God appearing in the
Right.
clouds
No, yeah,
and
right.
imparting the knowledge. If the clouds part and God comes down and you see his divine hand, you actually see it. It's not enlightenment unless he goes, pull my finger.
Yeah.
It's always something like that, something really stupid. And Holy Mountain is like that. It has those moments. And so I'm always like, no, this guy's actually onto something. He's at least on that like magician wavelength.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what he cares about. He cares about this experience of imparting divine knowledge to people. And he thinks that rather than he will not use the word, he will use the moving image.
Yeah, yeah. I
You
mean, you
know?
use the medium you're good at. That's perfect.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like it's so interesting, because you're like, dude, this is your version of the divine Pymander.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I recommend everyone watch Jodorowsky's Holy Mountain. I also recommend El Topo. You
I
know,
think that's one of the reasons why you get some people who think that there's a grand conspiracy with all of this magic stuff in movies and all that type of stuff, is because they don't realize that the entire process of using that subconscious creativity just connects you to that part of yourself.
yeah, yeah.
And they mistake it for like being purposely methodically put in, and that's not how it works. It's
Yeah. Well, it's like trying to explain to people what like the Bavarian Illuminati actually was.
right.
It's like, what's a Bavarian Illuminati? It's like, oh, they were a bunch of scholars who
Mm.
thought it was the responsibility of the very educated, those people who really understood the classics of Western literature, to guide society. And so they decided that they were going to do that.
Hmm.
And they start running into other groups
That didn't like
were
that.
that didn't like that, and some that were very like-minded. Like
Hmm.
it's one of those things where people are like, well, the Illuminati works through the Freemasons. And I'm like, yes, but here's the thing. They already succeeded.
Hmm.
They already did what they set out to do.
Right.
And so we don't know if they continued on, but it was a conspiracy, but it
Sure.
wasn't like
Yeah.
hidden from the masses. It was right there.
Hmm.
As I like to say, like, people are like, America's a Christian nation. I'm like, technically it's a Freemason nation.
Yeah. Right.
It's a Freemason nation with a lot of concessions to Christianity.
And there were a whole lot of deists that were signing those papers.
Oh yeah. 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 But it wasn't hidden.
Mm-mm.
It was
No.
like, the founding fathers were Freemasons, and so they thought they agreed with those ideals. The primary one being which everyone is equal.
Yeah, and I
You
mean
are equal to your
even
brothers.
the designs that Thomas Jefferson was making for the buildings and things, there was no secret that he was pulling that from ancient Greek sources and things like that. Which
Yeah.
again, they're doing that same type of research that we're talking about and pulling the same type of ideals, which
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it is
And
what
and,
it
and
is.
yeah, and it ends up through the generations, that ideal, you know, manifested itself more and more.
Right.
Because people start coming up with really good arguments for why things that shouldn't be, using those philosophical principles.
Right.
You know, so when people are like, well, there was a conspiracy, and I'm like, there was, but everyone knew about it.
Yeah.
All you just had to, they didn't hide it. You just had to be paying attention,
Right.
you
Which is how
know?
a lot of conspiracies work.
Yeah, it
The ones that are
is. It
proven to be
is.
true, a lot of them are just they're pretty much right out there.
Yeah, yeah. Like 9/11, great one.
Hmm.
All right, we're going to send a couple of guys in and they're going to learn how to fly planes so they can crash into these buildings. That's a conspiracy.
Yeah.
That's a pretty horrific conspiracy.
Right.
I don't need to it's a hell of a lot more plausible than, all right, so it was a controlled demolition that was and all that. I'm like, no. No, just running the planes of the building. Well, then why does the building demolish in that way? And I'm like, they're designed to.
Right.
You're trying to tell me that we can do that, ha? And I'm like, no, I am telling you that we can do that because we can do that.
That's why you
Skyscrapers are
can, but
designed
that's why
that
you
way.
can do the controlled demolition in the first place.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
It's
But
designed from the beginning to be able to do that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And my father's an architect.
Yeah.
So I during there was that brief period of time where I was like, no, 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 let me explain this to you because you may not know this because you're not the son of an architect.
Hmm.
Like I can explain all this stuff. Well, how come the girders, don't melt, but the temperature, blah 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 blah? And I'm like, it's because it doesn't need to melt; it just needs to weaken,
Yeah. Right.
and then the weight of the building itself does the rest.
And it's like the beams, if they get hot enough for long enough, they
Yeah,
expand
yeah,
and
yeah,
everything else, and
yeah, and then
yeah.
just comes down. He's like, because my dad said, notice how that took like a little bit of time.
Right.
It took a couple hours, for that to actually happen.
Right.
And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. And he's like, yeah, 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 that's something I have to account for all the time.
I
We're
always think it's
always trying to
interesting.
find new ways of dealing with that because that's a
Yeah.
known problem.
I always think it's interesting because we have a large number of, I believe, conspiracy theorists who will go down the rabbit hole on something that I'm pretty sure when I look at, like, that's probably nothing. And then meanwhile, you'll have things going on like, oh, another drone strike just killed X number of civilians. And I'm like, well, who were they trying to kill? What's this? What's this thing
Yeah,
that's in the
like that's a
news that they didn't investigate further? Meanwhile, it's like I see that, but there's a definite conspiracy over here that we got to
yeah, yeah,
half
yeah.
report on.
Like chemtrails. Meanwhile, like assassination plot over here. Oh,
Right.
that's nothing.
Yeah.
Like what?
It's like there
You
are
know?
conspiracies, but they're not all as elaborate as people are making them
Yeah,
out to be.
yeah. They're usually a lot less elaborate. They're
Hmm.
usually really simple.
Exactly.
Because it's a complicated thing. You want to keep that as simple as possible.
Right.
Just so you can and tell someone, okay. Because look, if the ultimate culmination is we need you to press this button,
Yeah.
you gotta have the button very clearly marked.
Yeah.
So they simplify it as easy as possible. It's like, all right, so your part of this is you need to go to Paris, kill this guy.
Hmm.
It's like, why this guy? We're not gonna tell you.
Right.
Oh, all right. But you want me to do it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go kill him. All right. And then you realize that, oh, by killing this guy, then the boardroom, the shareholders of this one company, all of a sudden they have to share a vote. Something is delayed by 2 days, allowing a window of opportunity to get spies in, or something like
Yeah.
that.
Right. Yeah.
Like it's always like shit like that. It's
Hmm.
never like I the JFK conspiracy is one that just drives me up the wall because it's like like a lone gunman couldn't do that, and I'm like, of course they could.
Hmm.
Of course they could.
Yeah.
It would be easy. It's always easy. Like the thing I find more miraculous than the JFK assassination is the fact that doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah. I'm surprised that they seem to do a really good job. I would assume the Secret Service and NSA and those are doing a good job of weeding out when some people would be threatening and making sure they're not in the right place at the right time, so to speak, to cause problems. and you'll never
Yeah.
get credit for doing that as those organizations, because people only notice you when things go wrong.
Yeah.
And so those
If you
organizations
do
could be
your
like
right, if you
saving
do your
people's asses every day. And we would
yeah.
just be the one time they screw up, everyone's like, well, what the hell was all this for?
Yeah, your job is to be yeah, when you're in those organizations, your job is to be a ghost.
Right, exactly.
You know, you are the ghost in the machine, which is America.
Hmm.
You know, and it's weird. Like I've known a lot of people who have been involved in that
Right.
on both sides of the equation, either as someone who ran afoul of the NSA or the CIA, or who worked there, and
Hmm.
all of a sudden you start figuring things out about them.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh my god! Like, like one guy it was what one guy's like, yeah, I work in Virginia. You're like, oh, okay, cool. Well, a lot of people work in Virginia. And all of a sudden you see the guy like jump out of a two-story building and like do some like fucking kung fu shit on a guy, and you're like, where in Virginia do you work? And they'll just be like, Langley.
Right.
You're like, are you a spy? And he's like, no, and then you get an answer like, no, I was laid off. You're like, what?
Then you're like, were you?
Yeah, were you? Or is this? Yeah, the intelligence world is like that, and having kind of like stumbled into it very early on as a kid, for
That's
just because we had access to a computer with a thing that no one else had at the time called a modem.
yeah. Yep.
you know you find yourself in a very strange world where all of a sudden people are having conversations with you in very strange locations.
Yeah.
Going like, do you live, it's like, is your name, you're like, yeah, do you live it, yeah, what do you know about, and you're like, the fuck, like, what the fuck are you asking me about,
Right.
and it's like, well, there was a call made from this number around this time, do you know anything about that?
That's
Am I in
awesome.
trouble, sir? And they're like, no, but we want to confirm whether or not it was you. You're like, yes, it was me. How did you figure that out? Like being asked about, like, how did you know, how did you get that phone number that you used?
Right, yeah.
How did you know about, you know, the fact that at the time you could hack into any payphone with a paperclip,
Right.
shit like that. And you're like, I'm not going to tell you everything, but it wasn't that hard to figure out,
Right.
stuff like that. So you find yourself in a very weird world. Um, and it's Washington, D.C. Like, if I had discovered that in like California, I don't think anyone would have given a shit.
Yeah, exactly.
It'd have been like, whatever. What are you gonna be? You spy on like fucking movie stars all you want, kid. Nobody gives two fucks about that. But if you live in the Washington D.C. area, it's like, oh, that could be senators, that could
Yeah.
be the president.
Yeah.
Got to be careful. And I'm absolutely sure a lot of it is just like, all right, there's a group of young computer hackers over there. Just go down there and put the fear of God in them.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
Let them know we know and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and a lot of people still have a lot of relationships with those people. Like, I know some other hackers from the area who are like, oh yeah, you remember that guy? I'm like, yeah, well, we work with him now.
That's
Like,
awesome.
oh, like, yeah, that shit would happen all the time.
Yeah.
And it really always came down to, well, why did you do that? Why do you work with him now? And they're all like, oh, well, you got to understand something about those days. They're like, the telecommunication system had just opened up. And we knew that there were no passwords, but no one was listening to us. People were not listening to us when we said our systems are open.
Yeah.
Which was true. Almost all the systems were open back in the 80s because in order to get in them, you had to have this special, operator phone, and they knew where all those were at any given time. But as soon as the modem was created as a commercially available electronic device, all that changed. Because all of a sudden, because someone was like, wait, someone made that as who the fuck declassified that one?
Yeah.
And they, that was the moment the government realized that something had been mislabeled. And here's the freaky thing. The thing which had been mislabeled was a little project that was which was basically codenamed the Internet.
Yeah, right.
It had been accidentally declassified. And that's when, and the 80s was when they started working on it, because they were like, some of the people who had worked on it, who had entered the private sector, had heard like, hey, that thing's been declassified. That thing you were working on, it's been declassified. And they're like, oh my God, really? Oh, send it over and get me a guy with $1 billion.
Yep.
Because now that it's been declassified and we can work on it, that means we can take that to the people.
Yep. It's awesome.
Yeah. All kinds of stuff like that happens. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, this conversation is made possible by a clerical error.
Yeah.
I fucking love stuff like that, So yeah, it's weird. It's like, yeah, no, conspiracies do happen. Secrets are kept from you, but it's not. It's never the stuff the conspiracy theorists talk about. It's always because the real stuff that they hide from you is more mundane shit.
Yeah, a lot of times it's not as flashy. It's not going to get the views. And there's probably conspiracy theorists out there that are on the right point, but we probably don't hear about them because it's just like, who's going to look up, the more realistic conspiracies?
Yeah, or the other thing I like to point out is like, there are a lot of them where you're like, ooh, you're almost there.
Yeah.
You are almost there, but then at the last minute, you're like, aliens.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Like,
yeah, or a lot of the times they're like, and then it's because they're all Satanists, and I'm like, well, they're definitely not.
That's
like a lot of these behaviors that you've described don't match that conclusion. But
no, like
thank
my
you
favorite
for playing.
because I'm a San Franciscan, like. I live in San Francisco, and I'm a Satanist. Like, occasionally someone asks me about Bohemian Grove.
Right.
And I'm like, no. Like, no. Like, Bohemian Grove has nothing to do with Satanism. It might have to do with alchemy, but it doesn't have anything to do with Satanism. And they're like, well, how do you know that? And I'm like, well, Anton LaVey never performed a ritual there. Like, he just didn't. He talks about it in his guidebook to San Francisco, Dr. Weird's Guide to San Francisco. But it's not like a place that the Church of Satan went to regularly. And the thing you have to remember is that it's a public space.
Right.
It's like, have people in robes gathered there and done shit? Yes. Yes, they have.
Right, yeah, sure.
Yeah, but everyone's like, but who are these people? It's like, well, it's the Bohemian Grove Society. It's like, who are they? Well, these are really rich people. Right. They're like, well, what are they doing there? And they're like, they are reenacting a ritual.
Right.
But it's like, but is it to actually summon a demon? Well, probably not, because that's unnecessary.
Right.
When you really get down to it, it's completely unnecessary. But what they're probably just doing is their version of just doing flashy shit.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of fun. Like when you're in a secret society, it's fun to put on robes and masks and be like, yes, take the virgin sacrifice. Person who's like in no real danger, like some actress or some hooker, somebody's wife that is just fucking there. That's what half those damn things are.
Yeah. And they can still have a psychological effect on the audience,
Hmm.
which has value, which still makes it a ritual and still makes it every bit as potent, but it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be what Hollywood thinks of as Satanism.
Yeah, exactly,
And I think that's where the
exactly.
confusion comes in, is people think, well, if there's a ritual and people are in robes, Satanism. And you're like,
Satanism.
well, no.
Yeah. It's like no. Satanism is actually way more specific than that, you
Right.
know. But the other thing that occasionally, like, not many people these days, but like everyone, the dirty secret of Christianity's like obsession with Satanism
Hmm.
is because it's proof of occult power.
Right. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, every other Christian who is obsessed with Satanism is wants a wish to be granted by the devil. That's the dirty secret. If they're truly obsessed with Satanism, it's because they're looking for him because they want to make a deal.
It's one of two things. It's either they want it to be real to make a deal, or they want to verify their own religion by seeing the antithesis is real.
Yeah, that's
Either
the
one
other
of those.
that's the
But
other
either one of
part.
those is you're really just looking for the devil, is what you're trying to do.
Yeah. They want to know that the devil is real. They want him to have occult powers, and they
Yeah.
they want it to be, it's it's what the Seven Seal is all about.
Hmm.
That segment where the Inquisitor is like, "Tell me, did you really make a deal with the devil? Tell me, did you really make a deal with the
Yeah, it's like
devil?"
super important to him.
Yeah, yeah, it's super important. It's because if the devil is real, then maybe God is real.
Hmm.
And I remember, like, one of the things I liked about this old like role playing game called World of Darkness.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, is that they basically said, they're like, "Is God real?" And they're like, "We're gonna tell you this. In the world of darkness, is God real? The answer is it doesn't matter. God will never appear.
Right.
He never appears. So whether or not God is real is irrelevant, but we will tell you this: the devil is real."
That's awesome.
Yeah, and you're just sort of like, "Oh man, that was kind of brilliant,"
Yep.
And I was like, well, that kind of is like the perfect, like, like American Gothic kind of
Hmm.
thing to do. God may not be there, but Satan is.
Yeah. And I remember Vampire the Masquerade back in college, which is part of that same
Oh
world setting.
yeah.
And all the storyline about Cain being the first vampire and everything. It's like there's some strong biblical ties, but then they're still like, but we're not saying, we're not.
Yeah, exactly. They did so much of that stuff. It's really interesting. Like those guys who put it together were real. They were real like occult mythology
Yeah,
geeks.
yeah. That's what made it so interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Like that's what really worked about vampire. It's what really worked about mage.
Yep.
Because man, mage, they got so wacky with it.
With all the yeah,
You know,
the
it's
technomancy and
yeah, the technomancy and the marauders and paradox and all that stuff.
paradox. That's right.
Yeah. I actually, like, as I keep telling with people, it's like, well, the weird thing is that the new one that they did, Mage the Awakening second edition, it's way more toned down from what Ascension was
They
doing.
have to be.
Yeah. Yeah, because it needs to make sense.
Right.
And so you gotta tone everything down. You're like, wait, guys with disintegration rays are mages? You're like, you know?
Yeah, right.
Ah. All I could say is, what can I tell you? It was the 90s.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, that inspiration for the Matrix wasn't going to happen by itself.
I still believe we can thank Grant Morrison for that, right?
Oh God, yeah. That guy was a huge inspiration. Like
Hmm.
Kid Eternity is still one of my favorite like occult comics of all time. And every time someone reads it, they're like, "What the fuck happens?" And I'm like, "I I'll be honest, I don't know. I can't put it into literal terms. All I
Yep.
can tell you is amazing shit happens in that story. I think only outdone by the Invisibles.
Yeah, which I think is the direct inspiration for Matrix.
Yeah, yeah. During that period of time, fuck yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Like the first like 12 issues of that comic is pretty much
Yeah.
the story of the Matrix. You know, young guy arrested,
Hmm.
threatened, meets this weird dude who tells him like, you know, hey man, I want to tell you about as a and in the Matrix it's I want to tell you about the Matrix, but
Right. Yeah.
in the Invisibles it's like I want to tell you how magic is real, kid.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know, like and they both use the analogy of Plato's cave.
Yeah.
You know, it's
It's good.
that was so fun. It was so fun. I loved the occult comics in the 90s. They were so awesome. So I wanted to add. There are two questions I want to ask. One is kind of one is very silly. The other is slightly more serious. I'll start with the silly one. Have you ever seen any of the videos by the Unleash Your Inner God guy?
Yeah, the Become a Living God guy, yeah. EA
Yeah,
Coetting. Yep.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
What's your opinion of that?
I get that question a lot, actually. And people are never satisfied with my answer because I take a kind of in-between approach as opposed to a polarized view of what he does. But he does in some ways rub me the wrong way in that he's got that overly edgy style to him, which
He
I don't have
takes
any
it.
problem with edge. I think it's cool, but
Yeah.
sometimes it seems a little put on, because it's just so over the top. And being someone who practices, it's like, yeah, okay, but you're putting a lot on here. But on
Yeah,
the
yeah,
other
yeah.
hand, what he's saying isn't incorrect. He doesn't strike me as someone that's a charlatan or a faker. I just think that's his style. And it's just
Yeah,
like, yeah,
like
it's either gonna
my
work for you or not.
yeah, like my thing with him is I look at him and I go like, "Whoa, you're taking this way too
Right.
seriously, dude."
Yeah.
You know, like way too seriously.
A lot of it I chalk up to he's trying to make it a business. Like
Yeah.
on my channel, I have a 9 to 5 job and then I do this on the side just because I have a vested interest in getting information out there on this. And my
Yeah.
interest is in changing people's perception of it, making it more accessible, things like that. Not so much on trying to sell things. And I look at his and I go, okay, well, you're trying to sell to me. So you can't say what I can say. You can't say, I don't know this, I don't know that, but this works. You've got to come at it like I've got a package that's gonna solve all your problems.
Yeah.
And at that
Let me
point,
how
I'm
to
like, I know you
show you
don't.
how to sell your soul in a
Right.
buyer's market, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, I know that what you're really selling is the same thing that I am talking about, and that there's truth to it and it's of value. And I also know that people who won't listen to me will listen to him because they're interested in that version of
Yeah.
it, and they'll get the same value in the end. So I don't disrespect it. I just look at it like that. That's a very different way to present this.
Yeah, I'm a little more searing about it, you
Mhm.
know. Like I'm definitely of the like first thing I'm like, "Whoa, dude, take it easy." You
Yeah.
know, like take it easy whether or not anything you're talking about actually works. Um
Right. Tone it down.
really, dude? Tone it down.
Yeah.
Like I'm an intense guy and I'm telling you to tone it down,
A
man.
lot of my viewers feel that way about him, and so that's why I think I get the question is because they want me to say that exact thing, and I'm like, well, I can understand it. And they're like, no, we want you to say, don't do that. And
Well,
I'm
you
like,
you
yeah,
you want to you want to say that like, nah, the guy's full of shit. He's a
right.
liar.
That's
He's a
what they want to hear, but
charlatan.
I'm like,
You know.
I look under the surface of it. If I ignore the put on part and I pay attention to what he's actually saying, I go, okay, yeah, that's right.
Well, yeah, like the even it goes as far back as even like the Corpus Hermeticum.
Hmm.
Like there's a reason that very often that a lot of things are directly based on that, including Satanism talks about like you know be the God within. Like
Yeah.
there's kind of a reason for that. But like even but everyone who comes at it from that angle is a huckster.
Right. Yeah.
Whether or not they've got anything, they are hucksters. Like Anton LaVey was a huckster.
Right. Like some of it, well, with anything, some of it is real and some of it is fake. And
Yeah.
And someone like me, I try to do my best to say, here's what I know that's real and the rest I don't know, but I'm sure there's stuff that I'm screwing up, and so there's still some stuff you're going to have to piece out of whatever I'm saying too. But mine
Yeah,
isn't
yeah, yeah.
purposeful. Whereas when you try to have a certain level of agenda in it, then you've got to kind of like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's like with
Now
religions, it falls in that same trap because of that.
it does.
Like we
It
can't say we
does.
don't know because then the whole thing falls apart. So you try to make up answers to things here and there is what it feels
Yeah,
like.
yeah, yeah. It's like you're using this trick to try to, get something for yourself in the material world, or are you actually like searching for, the truth?
Right.
And on that level, like everything we do has to come with a caveat of like, yeah, it's entirely possible that we're all just insane.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Well, it's
we're
like
all just crazy,
I get
and
similarly the question, do I believe that we're gods? Which I'm always like, well, first you have to define to me what you mean when you say God, because
yeah, it's a
that,
big deal.
yeah. And do I believe the way that he presents it? Not really,
Yeah,
but do
yeah.
I believe that we're all interconnected and that maybe what we think of as God is actually us in some way? Yeah, sure. But that's different than kind of the way it's being sold. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is being, he's selling it as,
right.
I can sell you he's cult leadering it,
Yeah, exactly.
like, I could sell you the absolute, like, secrets of the universe, blah blah, with
Mhm.
only 6 easy payments of
Yeah,
1995,
exactly.
and on the one hand, I do find myself like respecting it a little bit
Sure.
because I'm like, well, if it works, it works. But at the same time, like that's not really what I'm about
Yeah, right.
because I find myself not listening to those guys on a
Yeah,
regular
exactly. And I
basis.
think that's why a lot of people ask me about it because they're looking at him like, well, he's got if you've got the type of eye for it that we do, you're like, he's got the smell of somebody who's, trying to sell me something that's not real.
Yeah,
But as someone who practices, when I listen to his stuff, I'm like, well, what he's telling me, when you get past the first 5 minutes of intro and you ignore the last 5 minutes of trying to sell you something, the meat in the middle is actually, hermetic principles and other stuff that I've studied. And I go, well, I know that's real, what you're talking about in the middle, but you have
yeah,
packaged it in this like edgy cult dish package. So I get why it
yeah,
rubs people the wrong way, and for me, for a long time, it rubbed me the wrong way. I just learned to go, okay, well, it's his thing. It's how he's making his money, and I'm sure it appeals to certain people, so that's why he's doing it. And if you listen to the guy when he talks about his backstory, he sounds like that's how he kind of got into it. Was that he met people who kind of sold it in the same way, and then found the parts that worked and et cetera. And he even talks about throwing out stuff that doesn't work, but I feel like it's just a progression of that. Like he's taking it down a notch from them, and then people like us are taking it down a notch from that.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
he's probably selling it the way it was sold to him. He knows it worked for him to get him into it, so use it again.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, very, very possible. Oh God, someone is mentioning Cult First Edition, that role playing game. I'll be honest. I'll be honest. That actually uh, does in many ways simulate a very specific occult experience.
Hmm.
The game Cult. It's a very weird one, but it's a kind of, yeah, because like obviously like mankind starts making cities and cities become a thing, and so they occupy a space in people's personal mental geography.
Hmm.
And so you do have the sense sometimes if you like enter a trance state or a dream state and you start seeing cities, you
Hmm.
will start to like kind of come to the conclusion that like, wait, it feels like there's some sort of like something controlling this, like there's something behind it,
Yeah, sure.
you know. And of course, like if you're using the metaphor of a city, well, a city is entirely planned. It may not be a good plan,
Hmm.
but it is the artifice of man, is and man creates systems in his cities which kind of run themselves. they need people to make it happen, but how how often does someone involved in the maintenance of a city, like a cop or a judge or whatever, go like, well, this is not in accordance with the regulation.
Right. Yeah.
And you're like, you wait, so the regulation is what determines what you do.
Right. And talking about this type of stuff is completely normal if you're talking about fiction.
Yeah,
When you're talking about the real world, people look at you sideways. But if you're talking about fiction, you say, well, in this story, the world setting is almost like another character. Everybody goes, oh, okay. Everybody knows what
yeah,
that means. And that's kind of
yeah,
what we're talking about, but on another level.
yeah. We're talking about like the way you interface with it
Hmm.
on a personal level,
Right.
even if there are not literally demons in a city.
Right. Yeah.
To you as an individual, there are.
And part of what
You
makes it
know,
so out there is that it's if you're comparing it to a story, it's like if one of the characters in the story suddenly realized that the world setting was like another character in the story, which is why it's like,
yeah,
that's not supposed to happen, but that's what's happening whenever you're having those thoughts about this world as opposed to about a story.
yeah, and it does. It gets really, really strange.
Hmm.
You know, it's um like someone once asked me like if I believed in the Fae,
Yeah.
and I am like, kinda,
Yeah, that's a good answer.
like kinda, like here's the thing about all that stuff, which is those are really, 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 those are ideas that are so closely tied with Western Europe,
Yeah.
specifically places like France and Ireland,
Yeah, Ireland. Yeah.
you know, like the Gaelic and the Celtic worlds,
Hmm.
like they're just so into that stuff, and it in your mind starts to boggle, but you start to understand what it is when you're like, why do we have so many words in fairy lore that basically describe the same exact thing, but the word is different?
Hmm.
And the answer to that is because it's an amalgamation of the myths of two different cultures that had
Yeah.
come up with the same story, but had different names for all of that stuff.
Hmm.
It's like, why is it called a pixie here, but a fairy here? And it's like, well, the one is the word of the word of the Celts, the other is the word of the Gauls.
Right.
You know, and stuff like that. That
Yep.
that happens a lot.
And once again, you get into that question: did they share a common ancestry, and these stories came from that, or was there something, and they both just described it?
Yeah, exactly.
Always,
And
always
like,
in that it could be either category.
yeah, and and those old fairy stories, they're
They're not happy.
weird. They're not happy. They're weird. They're super weird.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorites is the fey creatures is the Fachian.
Mm.
It is a creature that has one eye, one arm, and one leg, and it hops.
Hmm.
And it just chases after things. Another thing was the crap. What's it called? It's basically a living crossroads.
Mm.
There's a fairy that's a living crossroads. The clacker. That's it. The clacker. Which what is it? Okay, a clacker is a cow skull on a spike at the middle of a crossroads that talks.
I think I've seen the picture of this thing too.
Yeah,
Because again,
yeah, and
there's a lot of lore research that I've done, but it's back in the day, and like I vaguely remember things, but I don't always have it all. But yeah, I kind of remember it being like almost a stick that someone could use. It had
yeah.
like a
It's
head on it.
yeah,
And it
yeah,
sounds like a great movie, horror movie title, like The Clacker.
yeah. The clacker. It's like what? Like another one I always was very fond of is like an image that shows up a lot, and for good reason. Is the image of the black dog.
Yeah.
You know, the supernatural hound that
Yeah.
is like, it seems to be made of shadow.
And it's a cross-cultural thing too. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, and it's that one survives to the modern day.
Mhm.
You know, like that the black dog has become a trucker legend.
Yeah.
You know, because they, you know, you talk to anyone who's been trucking long enough, and you'll be like, "Have you seen the black dog?" And they'll be like, "Yes, I've
Yeah.
seen it." You know,
Yeah.
I've seen the black dog. And you're like, "What is it?" And they're like, "Well, I'm sure it's just your mind making shit up when it's really tired." This one dude, I follow this one guy. His name is like Jay Carnell. He's like
Mhm.
a YouTube trucker. Really, really, really interesting guy. And he describes his black dog experience where he's just like, you have to understand something about the black dog. You see it once, that's your first warning. You see it twice, it's your second warning. You don't see the black dog the third time.
That's
You
awesome.
know, yeah. And he's like, if you see the black dog, pull off the side of the road, get some rest, or you're gonna have an accident.
Right.
Because this is like your brain telling you, stop.
Yep. Yep.
So the other thing I wanted to ask is, what is an experience that you had that you'd be willing to share?
Well, there's a lot. So, are we talking about just with magic in general and the occult, or with entities, or
With entities.
okay? Um, so entities are interesting because, like we talked about, there's that question of what's psychological and what's not. But we'll ignore all that because we already went into it, and we'll just go from the viewpoint that I am going to tell you my experience, and people can judge for themselves if it's my own psyche or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But when I was early in, before I really started down what I was talking about before, Babylonian Sumerian pantheon, which was my how I stepped into the whole initiation into doing evocations and stuff like that. Uh, uh, Earlier in, I was playing more with Goetia, that type of magic. If anyone's familiar, that's demons. Um, but I didn't use the full Goetic method because I don't like using triangles. There's the whole controversy as to whether if you believe in it as spirits, there's the controversy as to whether you're imprisoning the spirit or this and that. All this,
Yeah,
there's a thing behind it.
yeah, I know what you mean. It's one of those, yeah, like on the one hand, you're like, yeah, I get the triangle is a very important shape, but on the other, you're just sort of like, God damn it, Crowley, you and your fucking math.
Yeah, right.
You know, like,
And I found that I don't need it to get it to work. And then you have the argument, some people are like, well, it's a protection. And I'm like, well, I'm not trying to command. What I was trying to do was get information. I'm like, I'm not trying to command the spirit. I'm trying to
yeah,
commune with the spirit. So, it's like you don't go commune with nature by putting it in a box. So,
yeah,
but I
yeah, yeah,
hesitate to tell other people don't use it because again, I'm like, I don't know what you're doing and I don't know what your headspace is from. But for me, I don't use the
yeah,
triangle. I don't do that. I still do the
yeah.
circle, but
When
I don't
people
do the
ask
triangle.
me like what they should do, I'm like, all right, this is what you do.
Right.
You know, you put yourself in a mind state,
Hmm.
and what tools should I use? Should I use the Athame? Should I use the wand? Blah blah blah. And I'm like, all right, here's what you use. Empty your mind. Now think of the first thing that seems to you like magic.
Yep. Use that.
And use that.
Yeah.
You know, like I think of playing cards, and I'm like, there you go.
That's your thing then.
Use playing cards.
And
That's now your
that's what I've
deal.
come to after all the years of doing it. But at the beginning, I had to follow the books and do this stuff, and because you don't know what you're doing, so an example helps. But as you get further into it, you're like, oh, it's about being in the right state of mind. It's just in the beginning, you don't know how to get into that state of mind. You don't know what that means. But anyway, at this point in time, I was trying to work with Astaroth because I had heard that Astaroth could be a gateway to knowledge about the other side, about demons, things like that. And my interest there was that I wanted to understand exactly these things we're still talking about, psychological versus reality, stuff like that. So I evoke Astaroth, and Astaroth appears as a woman, which I hadn't read up my history enough about Astaroth prior to that to have a reason to think Astaroth would show up as a woman. But later on in researching, I find out that Astaroth is actually like a demonized version of Ishtar, Inanna, the yeah. So
Ah.
it's they also gender flipped it to a male when they did that as well. So I was like, so I'm actually talking with Ishtar, which of course is why eventually I went the whole Babylonian route because she did exactly what they said. She became a guidepost for me to go learn what I wanted to learn. But when she showed up, not only did I expect a man and got a female form, the female form I got, she showed up looking like the dirt of the earth, but like a black clay dirt with insects moving through her and everything. And this came to
Oh
me as
man.
vividly as like I'm seeing you, but you could still tell at the same time that it wasn't solid. It wasn't like having a person in the room, but it was like hyper imagination. Like like when you try to visualize there being a desk in the corner and it's not there and you can almost see it, it's like amp that up a little bit to where you can see it. And that's the level that it showed up for me. And that was
Yeah,
the
yeah.
first evocation I had where it like I got a visual hit because prior to that it was always you'd feel like a pressure or like a heat or a chill depending, and then you might get some thoughts in your head that didn't feel like yours, and if you start to learn
Yeah.
how to differentiate that, that's how you can communicate. But that probably just sounds crazy if you haven't done this before.
Yeah, yeah. It does. There's no getting around it. You
Yeah,
know, it's that whole like, wait, you're talking with the voices in your own head, and it's like, yeah, but the thing is that no, it feels, at the very least, it feels very real.
right,
Like, and this is what, and for those playing at home, if you listen to Jordan Peterson when he says, you follow Jung hard enough, he will convince you that there are things that are happening in your own mind that have nothing to do with you, and that's terrifying. this is
right.
this is what he's talking about, this type of shit.
So she becomes sort of like a guide for me for a few months there, where she's like, I'm gonna teach you about this pantheon. We're gonna go down it, and it's also figure in that I'm going and doing research on my own related to this because that's what you do. And that's how I figure out, like, oh, the reason Astaroth looks like a girl is because it's Ishtar, and the pantheon she's showing me is Babylonian Sumerian pantheon. And okay, all of this is making sense, and it's clicking together. And so several demons in the Goetia are actually tied to other Babylonian Sumerian gods. Like, okay, I'm seeing where we're going with this. Like, I'm getting information, not the information I was seeking, not exactly, but it
Oh,
is the information I was seeking at the same time. It's things I didn't even know to look for. And so it's just that kind of cool thing happens when you start working with entities where there's enough hits that you're like that. Well, that was real and that was real. It's like, wow. Now the current entity I'm working with, because I'm always for some reason working with some entity at current. Right now I'm working with the Morgan, which is a Celtic entity.
yeah.
And the first time I evoked the Morgan, she tried to explain to me what she was. And she said, because I asked her if she was a fae, to your point. And she said, well, I'm not a fae, but I'm also not a god. And I said, okay. And then later, doing more research on her, I found out that from different peoples, they consider her to be of the fae, but not a fae. And that she's part of I can never say their name right. It's like Tuatha De Danann or something
Yeah,
like
that
that.
Tuatha De Danann.
Yeah, and that is not technically considered gods. They're almost like superhumans from another time period. So I was like, so not technically a god, not technically a fae.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like,
Oh, it gets
again,
even.
like,
Yeah, well, the thing that I found out about the Morgan that gets even weirder is by the time the Tuatha De Danann arrive in Ireland, according to their own myths, the Morgan has been there.
yeah, yeah. She's like
Like,
the most ancient out of them. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, and like her name literally translates down to the Phantom Queen.
yeah, exactly.
And you're like, what the fuck? What the fuck is she? Like, because if you're constructing a myth the way, like, like the Greeks did, or the Romans, or which is what we're a little bit more used to,
Hmm.
to a certain extent, like the Vikings, like everything is kind of in this like easily explainable package, even though it's got holes.
Yeah.
Like, but it's sort of like, oh, how did people come about? Oh, okay, well, one day a man went down, he killed a cow and said, I'm gonna make some people.
Right.
You're like,
Yeah.
whoa, whoa, wait, where'd that guy come from? Like, but
Yeah.
that's usually not that important to the tale and to the cosmology that the mythology is talking about.
Right.
With the Morgan in Ireland, it's really weird because there's always that moment whenever two people are fighting over Ireland. They're like, all right, someone's got to go to the Morrigan and
Hmm.
get her assistance. And they're like, Morrigan, will you give us your assistance? And then she picks
Yeah.
the dude who is like most heroic, that she takes a shine to. And it's
Yep.
just sort of like, if you fuck me, I will ensure your victory. And you're like, whoa, that's really direct. Like, she's very blunt.
Hmm.
She's like, no, 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 I want you to fuck me. But here's the deal. I'm gonna look like an ugly old hag while I do it. And you're just like, why? Wouldn't you want to look like a beautiful young maiden? She's like, no, 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 not until I've come like 3 times. Then I look like a beautiful maiden. You're like, why are you doing this? And you kind of realize that it is partially this metaphor for becoming the king,
Right.
because you're like, oh god, that's a lot of responsibility.
Hmm.
That's oh geez.
Yeah, and it's just like we're talking about where metaphor and the reality kind of intermingle, and that's how a lot of those old stories work too.
Yeah.
But you have to know to read them that way, otherwise you're just like, okay, what does this mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I've always been like very, very fascinated with the Morgan, because it is this she stands as this very odd figure in that mythology.
Yeah.
You
And it's
know.
it's weird for me because, having evoked other entities and things, I can tell you when something is different than other things. Though even if I can't explain how, and she completely feels different to work with than the other entities I've worked with. So it's very different.
Yeah, yeah, it is very weird, because you're like, some of these things feel like they are, gods in the kind of classic
Hmm.
Grecian
Yep.
sense, and others are like not,
Yeah.
and there are these bizarre, this is really, really weird hierarchy,
Hmm.
but how the hierarchy relates isn't quite clear.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so you're always I'm always just trying to figure that out, just so I could be like, okay, well, how how is my mind structuring this, just so I know that. But like, those answers are as murky to know
Yeah,
as
right.
like the big
Yeah,
questions of the universe, which is, who am I? Like,
right.
an incredibly murky question when you really get down to it. To ask yourself who you are. Well, I'm, fill in the blank. I'm Mike. I'm Jennifer. And you're like, well, yeah, but what does that mean? Now you're kind of stuck,
Right. Yeah.
and now you got to actually like go through the mental exercise of actually sorting that out. Because you realize that you don't consciously know that,
Yeah. Yeah.
unless you've actually gone through the process of trying to consciously know it.
Yeah. And if you do these practices, um, I hesitate to say you don't hear an auditory voice because sometimes it feels kind of that way, but you're not hearing
Yeah,
something talking that's outside of you. You're always hearing something in your mind, even though it registers as a voice.
yeah, yeah. You're always hearing like
Right.
you're always hearing the inner voice,
Right.
and the sometimes you can get yourself in a state where it does feel like it's emanating from outside,
Right.
but
But
it's
it's not something everyone else outside is going to hear. It's like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It's obviously just for you,
And
and
and meditation helps because if you can learn to quiet your own thoughts and then you can still hear it, that's whenever that's when you can get really clear communication, because you're in a state where you're not actively full of all these thoughts, and then you start hearing these very specific, like someone's talking to you, thoughts
Yeah.
that don't match the way you think about things, or what you intended. And you're like, well, who's saying that?
Yeah. What is actually speaking at this moment?
Right.
And there's no clear answer, because who would you ask?
Right. And the only answer that
You
can make
know?
it purely psychological and nothing else is that it's some part of you that you're just not consciously aware of. But it then still is a realization that there's a part of you that your conscious isn't aware of. So even that is information we're not really examining in most of the scientific models today. So
Yeah. Because like you've got that ongoing problem of like, how do you measure it?
yeah,
How can
we
you
don't
even
have a
tell that this
yeah,
person is telling the truth?
right.
Like that's the biggest problem, because you can't know what's going on inside another person's mind. If you could at least get to this person, what this person is saying is believable, if you is that they believe it, if you could even at least make that measurable,
Yeah,
then
right.
we'd be able to answer some of these questions. But right now it's just not possible.
Right. And then
you
you've got
know
the problem where people will talk about how clear is it coming through, and what they really mean is, how garbled is it with your own thoughts? Because if you're not able to stay in the state correctly, then your thoughts are also playing up here in your head. And they can get intertwined, especially if you're early in this and you're first doing these evocations. It's easy to mix your own thoughts with these things, and then
yeah
be like, how much of this was me? How much of this was it? Is there an it? You go down that rabbit hole of feeling almost insane from it.
It'll drive you nuts. But like when you actually hear it, when it's very clear, that seems to be when the greatest
Yeah.
psychological work is done.
And it's
you
always a
know
message that if you don't understand it now, in a few months you suddenly will. And if you go back in your journal, like, wait, this thing just happened to me. Is this what they said? And you go back and read it, and it'll be even more clearly the same thing than you're thinking in your memory. It's like, wow, this is real. But it's,
yeah
again, is it real because there's an external entity that's actually telling you these things? Is it real because you've kind of done, what is that, when you cause your own fate to go a certain way? You've kind of, what is it,
yeah
self-fulfilling prophecy, but you didn't realize it because there's a lot of subconscious in this.
Yeah. Oh, on value, the Black Abyss asks, is magic based on instinct? What's
Somewhat.
your answer?
I would say
Yeah,
intuition is a better word for it.
that probably is a better word for it.
But
Yeah.
intuition, some people don't like the word intuition because it's kind of wishy-washy. It doesn't explain exactly what I'm talking about. But your emotion, if you're able to experience pure emotion, and in other words, if you're not blocking your emotions, then yeah, you follow your emotions, and it will lead you to exactly what you need to do, and you can use them to cause these sort of changes. But that requires you to not push away your bad emotions.
Yeah, that's the big deal.
Yeah, a lot of
You
people
know.
can't do it. They can't follow their intuitions because if they feel something bad, they reject it. But
Yeah,
that's your warning system.
or if, and this is another thing that happens, or if you're put in Jungian terms, if your persona feels threatened.
Right, yeah. Yeah. And so a lot of it is getting to know yourself first. If you can get yourself into that state where you're comfortable with yourself, then all of it is just going to work better.
Yeah.
But then you can
Yeah.
trust your emotions, you can trust that intuition, your instincts to a degree, because your instincts are going to tell you, like, is something here with me? For example, you're going to get the hair standing on the back of your neck and stuff like that. But it's not just instinct; it's intuition also.
Yeah. Oh, Sean Murphy is asking, what movie about magic pisses you off? Uh, hmm. I can't actually think of one off the top of my head that pisses me off outside of like, cult leader videos.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
but I
hard
wouldn't say
because
those are movies,
even the ones that get it all the way wrong are still entertaining.
Yeah,
So
like even like If you're talking about like pisses me off on that like practitioner level, not really any of them.
Right. Yeah.
But if you're talking about like what movie that has magic do I just go, God damn it, this is the most bullshit thing I've ever watched. Maybe The Covenant, just because the movie's kind of bad. You know, like I'm like, look, I get it. You wanted to do craft with boys. The problem is it's just you. Like I don't know how to say it other than that movie tries to edge lord it while simultaneously not making it too edgy, and I'm like, dude, you needed to pick one. You know, pick one. Either make it like all the way edgy and just make it redonkulous,
Yeah.
or or just go ahead and like like sand the edges off. This the big crime of that movie for me is like just sticking in the tip. It's like, no, don't do
Yeah.
that. Yeah, don't do that.
I feel like most of them have enough, like, small amount of truth to make them interesting, even if you're a practitioner. And then the other stuff is just kind of funny because you're like, well, yeah, that's not it. Or it'll seem
Yeah,
metaphorical. You're like, well, that's not how it works, but I understand where you're going with that.
yeah,
So it's yeah, I don't know. And then you
yeah.
have
Well,
the like super fantasy versions, which are completely false versions, where people are shooting lightning everywhere and doing whatever. But that's fun. That's
yeah. That's
like
good fun because we all want to be able to do that.
right.
As I've always said, like, look, if you want to be able to shoot lighting out of your hands, you want to be an engineer.
Exactly. Yeah.
You don't want to be.
Build
You
some
don't
gloves
want to
that
be
do
a
that because that's
magician.
that's the
Yeah,
only way it's gonna happen.
yeah. It's
It's
like,
like you want to be
can
able
you?
to fly, build an airplane. We already have this technology.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, no, these are all really cool and useful things to do.
Sure.
Trust me, nothing but respect for like engineers. Oh my god, like if you ever actually seen a performer that has like the electricity gloves, which I've seen it live.
Nice.
The thing that's so cool about it is you're like, that is the most evil looking thing ever.
Hmm.
It is evil looking. Like you for a split second, even if you know it's a performer on stage, you would swear they were a demon.
You're like, it's Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars. He
Yeah.
just came to get me.
Yeah. You're just like, no, it just looks sinister,
Yep.
you know?
Well, the interesting thing is, if you're going to talk about how magic works in getting you what you want, let's say that you were someone who all you really wanted was to be able to fly, and that you were in the old days, and that you used magic to try to make that a reality, and you kept doing it in different ways, different spells, and whatever. And as you're doing that, you find interest in aerodynamics, you find interest in the way birds fly, you just start becoming fascinated more and more with flight because you're focusing all this energy on it. And the next thing
Yeah.
you know, you're designing the airplane, more or less.
Yeah, you're designing something. You're at least coming up with a bunch of shit that doesn't work that
Right,
eventually two guys in a bicycle shop
right. They eventually they use
fucking
to
come up
make
with.
to make flight, and that is kind of how the process actually works. You're not going to make yourself fly, but you're going to find a way to fly if you use it. And that's kind of how it works for everything. And so, again, you've got people doing it for movies, people doing it for engineering and whatever, who will never tell you that they're also practitioners, but
Oh,
their part of their inspiration comes from the practice.
GL Knight says, if there was one figure to approach in a ritual with the most trepidation, who would it be and your reasons? Okay, this is my personal answer. Anything claiming that it is God, be very careful.
Yeah, that's true. I would say, well, one thing is be skeptical of everything.
Hmm.
Because even though you have to suspend disbelief when you're in the moment, just remember that to keep yourself from worrying about whether it's metaphor or not in the moment, you have to just assume everything is like you're talking to another person, where you don't just trust everything someone says. So don't trust everything an entity says either. And then
Yeah,
when
yeah,
you
yeah.
come out, when you write it all out, anything you can remember and you can actually analyze it, then you can say, oh, this might be a metaphor, this may not. But to keep yourself from doing stupid stuff in the moment, treat it like it's your
Yeah,
buddy telling you a secret, and you're like, yeah, maybe, man. That will
yeah.
save you a lot
Like,
of pain.
yeah,
For
so,
me, for me, the entity that had that most kind of clout was Tiamat, working with because I worked with Tiamat after the Abyss. So
ooh.
so when I met Tiamat in the Abyss, it was like a shit your pants moment. But
As,
later,
as it probably should be.
yeah,
Yeah.
but later it was a okay, let's try to work together type of thing after I had gotten past the Abyss. for that particular issue I was working through. And she is someone you can work with, but she is like a pushy person. It's like you need to learn this lesson, I'm gonna push you off a bridge to learn it type of teacher. So it's rough and you got to
Yeah.
be respectful. Now,
Black
meanwhile,
serpent around the tree of knowledge,
yeah, yeah.
like, oh.
Now, meanwhile, you don't want to ever treat any of these entities like you're worshiping them the way that we understand worship today. You don't want to bow and be subservient and all of that stuff. That's not, at least that's my view of it. You always want to treat it like you would someone who you respect, but not who you put above you. So, like, if I'm talking to a family member that I think has great wisdom, like an older family member who has a lot they can teach me, I respect that person. But that's not the, I
Yeah.
don't worship them.
Yeah, it's not the same as worship.
Right.
Worship is really, really, really weird because, like, in my experience, if you offer, they either like it too much or they really hate it.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't end well at all.
Yeah, yeah, it generally doesn't.
It only
You
works
know,
if you're like, hey, I recognize that you have something that I like and I want to work with you, but from a mutual perspective. And if you think of it almost like whenever you're working with your boss on a project or something at work, and you're like, I respect my boss is my boss. I'm not going to treat him like I would just any old person because he's my boss. But at the same time, one day I plan to be his boss. And that's
yeah,
okay. He doesn't look at that as a challenge because if I
yeah. Well,
achieve
he
and
might, but it's
he
not
might,
like,
but it's like he understands that's within the realm of possibility as well. And that is kind of how the feeling is, the way working with any of these entities is that it's like, well, there's not really a superiority to the extent of you're a weak, puny human. It's more like, all right, I've got the wisdom you need. You've got to give me respect.
yeah, like I've only ever worked with one thing that really was okay with being worshipped, but I was warned against doing so.
Mm-hmm.
I was warned against it. Not because it would end badly for me, but it was one of those, if you worship him, you're missing the point.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
he will totally let you do
Oh,
it.
yeah.
He will totally let you do it, and he will soak up all the adulation because that's what he loves.
Sure.
But if you do that, then you're not necessarily going to have his respect, and you need his respect.
Right. I mean, is he
Because
gonna?
that's
Not gonna teach you to be like him if you're worshiping him.
exactly,
That's just how it is.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
that's how you have to approach these things. Now, meanwhile, if you treat them like they're beneath you, that's not gonna work.
No, no, that will always bite you in the
Mhm.
ass.
And I think
That will
that's where
always bite you in
you
the
get into
ass.
trouble with. I wouldn't say that necessarily the triangle causes that, but you get into trouble with that with some of the what is it called, the Kabbalah stuff where you're like calling them in and then commanding them. It's like, well,
Yeah,
that'll work.
yeah, yeah, it never sat right with me. I never really liked that aspect of the Key of Solomon.
Right.
That was always something I had trouble with because I'm like, that just,
I
I'm
think that's
sorry,
why,
I'm a liberal American. I
yeah.
kind of don't believe in doing that,
I think that's
when
why
you
we
really
get
get down to it.
stories like the monkey's paw and that type of stuff, where magic wishes turn around and bite you in the ass. It's because people who have used magic and have commanded get monkey's paw style wishes because
Yeah.
you're not being nice.
Well, you're looking for it's the, like, you're looking for what you want rather than searching for the thing that you need.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not like you can't get the thing that you want, but don't force the issue.
Yeah.
You can ask, and depending on what's going on, you will usually get an answer. Like, you will get an idea whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to go through with whatever. And
Mhm.
bear in mind, this part of your own psyche, or this thing that you're dealing with, if it is something outside of you, um don't believe that it's not going to fuck with you.
Oh, it will.
Yeah, it will. And sometimes they will say awful or try to get you to do really awful things because they think it's funny.
Hmm.
And if you realize that there is a part of you, like if you take that as an axiom, you can either take that as, well, these things are kind of on a different level, and so they don't see life and death as being as important as we do.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I think if you're
Yeah.
spiritual, supernatural level, then yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah. And
And
if
if
it's
it's
psychological, then it makes me have to question my own
yeah, yeah, yeah.
concerns because that's
If
definitely the way they act. Is
Yeah, yeah, because if it's psychological, like bear in mind that everybody has a psychopath inside them,
yeah, exactly.
and maybe you're talking to that, and maybe you shouldn't listen.
Right.
You know, like I sometimes feel like people who go like really crazy, and then like start going like I am the angel of death. Like I feel like they've bought into that
Bought
a little
into it,
too
right?
hard.
They missed the
You know,
point of some lesson and then just like
yeah.
kept going. And but you know what? It'll let you keep going.
Oh yeah, it totally will. It totally will.
It's like this
It's
is your
like
lesson to
nah.
learn. If you don't learn it, oh well.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you're like, it's one of those like, so is the instructor inside you a bit of a psychopath? It's like
Yeah.
sometimes it is,
And lessons is how I've learned to look at it. So at the beginning, I used to think like, okay, well, can I trust this? How's this work? And there was the whole question. But later I started going, okay, if I look at it like everything they say is like a teacher is giving you a lesson, and
Mm-hmm.
that it's one of those teachers that can be silly sometimes, can be a jerk sometimes, will sometimes give you the lesson that's going to put you in the most trouble just to prove that you were being an idiot. Like it's that kind of teacher.
Yeah, yeah, I always like it. It's always like the stories of like the Zen masters, the Kung
Right.
Fu masters.
It's the exact same style of teaching. And some people will call it a test. And I'm like, it's not really a test because if you get it wrong, it's not like they are disappointed. They just laugh at you
Yeah.
for not getting it right and tell you to try again. It's not really a test, it's a lesson, and it's a lesson that you have to learn. So they'll be like, "Oh, okay. You want to learn about that? Well, here's something." But it may be they're telling you the opposite so that you experience doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why people will mistake it for they're tricksters, they're this and that. It's like, well, if you do that and then you learn from it and you go back to them, they say, ah, see now?
Yeah, yeah. Well, teachers are always tricksters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like the best teachers always are. Like you know, because it to really teach someone something, you have to get them to connect the dots. If you just have
Yeah.
them do it rote, they're not really learning it. Like they
Right.
have to really internalize it, and so you have to get them to connect the dots. And this is also like, but of course that brings with it its own potential chaos because, yeah, as I've often said before, I was like, yeah, there is a reason that one of the biggest propaganda techniques is to draw a conclusion and then not make a statement.
Right.
To have you finish the statement in your own head is
Right.
where the power of
Yeah.
propaganda comes from.
And that's where that enlightenment moment comes that you were
Yeah.
talking about earlier, which a lot of times involves laughing at yourself because as
Yeah.
soon as you realize it, you're like, man, I'm an idiot. Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of, but it's that kind of relationship.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, stories of Zen masters are full of that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Like I always love the one. Everything is an illusion. Everything master, yes. Walks out in the middle of the street, gets hit by a bus,
Hmm.
hit by an elephant or whatever, and
Right.
he's like, "Why did you do that?" He's like, "The elephant was an illusion." He's like, "Idiot, so are you."
Yeah. It's like just because it's an illusion doesn't mean it doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But that's the harsh lesson that you had to
Yeah.
learn.
Oh man, someone once asked me, just like, do you ever have tools, like non-physical tools that you use when you're doing this? I recently accumulated one. I didn't used to have them
Mhm.
because I didn't find it necessary, but I was having this one experience and it just manifested.
Yeah.
You know, it just happened. It's one of those like, um, I was having a confrontation
Yeah.
uh with Osmodius, and we were fighting, and all the old tricks weren't working. You know, like as he warned me, he's like, I'll eventually,
That's the
that trick will
worst.
only work so long. And like it had worked a lot of times, and I knew eventually it was gonna not work anymore. You know, well, that moment finally came, and I don't know where it came, where the idea came from, but I had a thing that can only be called a sword made out of peacock feathers.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yeah, and so I started using that and won the encounter.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, it's
which
really weird to try to explain like internal mental battles
yeah,
because I've had a couple myself, one more recently, and I've neglected to really talk about it on my channel because I've just basically told people, you know, I had a supernatural experience that only furthers my belief that these things are external to us in some way, et cetera, and then not gone into a lot of details. But part of it was weird stuff happening around the house, which is where I'm going, okay, there's physical manifestation here, and that objects are in a different place than when I left them and things like that. So I'm like, that's cool. But then part of it was in the process of doing banishing. I did all the regular banishing techniques and the smudging with the sage and stuff like that.
yeah.
And normally that's good enough. But after I did that, then I got pulled into this thing, exactly what you're talking about, where it's like a mental battle where you're not physically doing anything, but in your mind you're seeing this battle going on between you and this thing. And then
Yeah.
you basically have to outwit it, and there's no other way to put it than that. Uh,
Yeah,
and and
exactly.
if you do or not is probably, I don't know what happens if you don't because I've been successful so far. But I don't know. There was with one of them, it was like I was being drowned in a lake, and I had to. The only way to win was to grab it and pull it into the lake with me, as opposed to struggling to get back up. And then once we were under there, I was able to. I don't know how, but I was able to like pull it inside of myself. And then because it was in me, I had control over it, and then I could destroy it. But it's
Yeah.
weird head trip stuff like that. It's not like the regular laws of physics style stuff if you've ever experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it isn't at all. It's like this weird fight with symbols,
Yeah, exactly.
you know, and like and when you realize that a symbol can actually like be more than just an image that's drawn on something, you know,
Yeah,
that's where it gets really strange, because like you realize that like drowning itself is a symbol, dragging something down is a symbol, you know, like it gets weird.
yeah, and the weird thing I'm working with now is the synchronicities that happen here in the physical world, where I'm starting to have times where I'll ask a question or whatever, and an actual physical crow will come land on the roof and look at me or something like that. And I'm working with the Morgan whose symbols are the crow, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, that wasn't just the normal communication in your head that you're having. You just showed me a sign, so to speak. And up until the past few months, I would have been someone to say, well, signs don't work that way. That's not a real thing. Now I'm like, oh, well, I don't know.
Well, yeah. Like it's one of those like, if you're real, give me a sign, and all of a sudden there's just like a bird sitting there looking at you.
Yeah.
You're
And
like,
then you're like, well,
okay, that was
am
weird.
I choosing to make that the sign or
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that the
You
sign, you
you
know?
you never
You
quite
never,
know, because what you're really, I feel like what we're really looking for is we're looking for meaning.
right.
You know, we're searching for meaning, and we're trying to find ourselves in that meaning.
Exactly.
You know, because we know that what's important to us somehow leads us to understanding who we really are.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're on any of these paths and you get far enough in, that's what it's about. It's always about self-discovery.
Yeah, yeah, every time. Oh God, what was it? Someone asked if does fiction matter? Yes and no.
Yep, that's what I would have said too.
Yeah, yes and no. Probably a really good way of putting it is, if you want to do this stuff, it's always better to totally steal than it is to borrow. Like, don't use H.P. Lovecraft, that stuff is too heavily borrowed.
Yeah.
You know, like it's it's just borrowed, man. It's one of those things where like Alan Moore gets way farther with a fake god
Hmm.
than he would ever with anything from the Cthulhu mythos, because that is something he completely stole.
Yeah.
You know, like that has meaning to him, like really. And the problem with a lot of I don't know, shared fictional worlds, I don't even know what to fucking call it. You know that some of these things are kind of cheap.
Hmm.
You know inherently they're kind of cheap. Like if you worship the gods of the Cimmerillion, it's kind of like really, you know, really.
Right. But then on the flip side of that, some people would argue that maybe the mythology that I'm using to talk to Babylonian gods and things like that is also just stories. It's also
Yeah,
fiction.
yeah. But here's the thing that I think is really interesting about it. It's there's a difference between fiction that's been around for a few decades and the fiction that has existed for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Like that, for some reason, for some unknowable reason, that shit lasts.
Yeah.
The ones that last seem to be the ones that are the most potent.
Yeah.
Like, even if Glycon's like a fake god, it's a fake god from back in Roman days,
Right.
that has somehow survived through some quirk of fate. You know,
Hmm.
the Sumerian gods is the same way. It somehow it's been it has been proven to hold some form of meaning for some people at some period of time.
Right.
And that's kind of what you're looking for. You're looking for something that has stood some sort of test of time, because the meaning in those things is a little bit more accessible.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things at the same time where you want to go to what you're pulled toward. So again, if you're able to feel your intuition, if you're able to feel like excitement toward certain things and non-excitement toward other things, that'll help you figure out what, if you're trying to find an entity to reach out to or something, that'll help you find what to reach out to.
Yeah,
And again, if it's psychological, that's just your way of figuring out what issues you need to work on. And if it's not, then it may be that you're being called by that entity. It depends on how you want to look at it. But from either side of the fence, that's the way to do it. Find something that
yeah,
has a deeper meaning to you, but also that has some kind of staying power in the cosmic consciousness, for lack of a better way of explaining it. And that'll be the perfect thing to reach out to first.
yeah, yeah. Like, oh man, the thing I'm very fond of saying about spirit animals
Hmm.
is this, which is, all right, if like, how do I know when I found my spirit animal? And I go, it's humiliating. Like, like you're embarrassed. If even if it's like the most awesome thing ever, you're like, oh god, I can't believe. Oh jeez.
Hmm.
Like if you think for a minute, the guy who's like, like my spirit animal is the wolf, like that guy is internally going, oh my god, I always do what fucking people fucking tell me, and I am always way too angry about it, and like, god damn it, I can't. I'm always growling at things. Oh Jesus Christ. Okay, fine, it's wolf. Jesus fucking
Right.
Christ. You know, like that is how it is. Like the guy whose spirit animal is bear is like, oh my god, I'm a fucking fat ass. Like it's always shit like that. It always is slightly humiliating to you.
Right.
To you, other people may see it as like the most awesome thing ever, but for you, it's a little embarrassing.
Hmm.
Oh man, yeah. Like when I had one finally appear to me, yeah, it was humiliating. But everyone's like, "What are you talking about? That's an awesome one." And I'm like, "No, it is awesome, but it's also everything I kind of don't like about myself." So
Right. Well, I mean,
there
that
you
makes
go.
sense though, right? Because you're
Yeah, it
seeing a
totally
lot of
does.
yourself in it. It's like seeing a mirror and you're like, oh, wait.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. So yeah, like the one of the weirdest things that ever something ever said to me was Asmodeus. You
Hmm.
know, which is he's like, you're a piece of me that's been plucked out.
Mm.
You know, and I'm just like,
What does that mean?
what does that mean? You know, like, and the thing was is that that whole experience really lined up because it is one that I had that experience back in my 20s where it was like I would have this reoccurring hallucination. And this is like a this when you get into the psychedelic space, the space between what you're actually hallucinating, as in you open your eyes and you see this,
Yeah.
and the stuff that's going on psychologically in your mind, that membrane gets really
Yeah,
blurry.
yeah. That's the danger of doing this stuff when you're on psychedelics.
Yeah. It is. You could very easily mistake something that's just happening in your head for something that's real if you're not really well versed in it.
I do this with meditation and trance technique instead. And as a result, like I said, I was in the abyss. I saw the eye open. I was back. I was like, hell no. And I was back here and I'm safe. But if you're high when that happens, you might not be able to come back.
Yeah.
You might
Like,
have to face that before you're ready.
yeah. Well, that's what makes it so intense.
Right.
You know, because I have, and those experiences are really intense. They're
Hmm.
super intense. And they will tell you all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yep.
You know, and was I part of the tale? No, I didn't get the feeling I was part of the tale specifically. It was just a piece. It was like I said, like I was part of a lattice work of lizards, of
Mm.
pink and purple lizards that made up Osmodeus, and I was like this little lizard that was plucked out from that lattice work,
Mm. That's
and
interesting.
yeah, and something was done to it.
Nice.
And I'm just always found myself going like, what does that
Yeah.
mean?
That's where I
But
always go into that same question, metaphor or literal?
yeah. It's really odd. It's like obviously I have a physical body, so I was at
Right.
one point one separate sperm and one separate egg
Sure.
that came
Yeah.
together in a female body. It was gestated, all that stuff. But when you start thinking about like concepts of the soul or the mind or the will or whatever you want to call it, that thing which is essentially you that we don't have a really good solid grasp on,
Right.
that seems to exist in the world of metaphor.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing is concepts can be metaphorical entities and things too. So it's like maybe you split from society, but the
Yeah,
society is Asmodeus or something like that. But like
yeah.
you don't know, like is that what it meant? Or
Yeah, it has yet to reveal itself.
and usually what I've found is that it'll reveal itself on its own at some point, but
Yeah.
it's always months to years later. And usually you don't even recognize that it's the same thing. You'll just go through life like you've had some revelation about something, like, oh man, that's really cool. And then even months to years later than that, you'll be like, wait a minute, are those two things connected? And then you go
Yeah.
back and that's why I have the journal. You go back and read and you go, hell yeah, they're connected.
Yeah. You look back at the stories and you're
Yeah.
like, "Whoa, this is yeah,
Yeah.
yeah." You find these weird motifs that just seem to follow you around.
Mhm.
Like have you ever? I gotta ask, have you ever had one of them tell you to ask somebody else?
Yeah. 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 Yeah, and I have a friend now who I didn't even know before who watched my channel. I was having trouble with one of the concepts. I was like, could be this, could be that. I'm not sure, whatever. And he was working with an entity that told him, well, reach out to him and tell him because you know. So he did. And so then I reached out. It was like he was like, hey, I want to do a Skype. I was like, sure. It was just a private Skype. And he's talking to me about some random stuff. Turns out the entity he's working with was the entity I was working with at the same time. The one that
Oh,
I had been
weird.
asking the questions to, and I was like, okay. Like
Yeah.
coincidence or not, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had one that was just basically like, ask him, he knows the name. And I
Yeah.
was like, okay. So I asked him, and he just offered it up. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, her name is this.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I was like, oh, got it. Right.
Right.
I should have guessed that. I'm an idiot, you know?
And it usually
Yeah.
seems like they'll do that. They'll either ask you to go to somebody or else they'll just get frustrated and then someone will come to you. And that happens if you're not getting something. It's like you'll ask a question, they'll give you an answer that seems vague. You ask another question, they give you some kind of over the top metaphor. You ask the question again, and they're like you're just not understanding what I'm saying.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, you
you
ain't
ask
getting
this
it.
person, or else they just throw their hands up, and then in a few days somebody calls you randomly about the same subject, and that happens. And that's again why I'm like, well, there's an aspect of this that's not all in a single person's brain for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It seems there is an aspect of the shared experience,
Yeah,
and it's God. I always feel so weird like talking about it because it's
it's outside
very
of what culture believes
yeah,
right
yeah,
now.
yeah. It's way outside. It's way outside of it because like we live in a for good reason, for very good reason, we live in a very materialistic world, because we know that that's real enough, like
Right.
this glass is real. We know that,
Mhm.
so we focus on things like fluid dynamics and even math to a certain extent.
Right. Yeah.
But I've always used math as the big example of something we know is real that doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's true.
Like we know the things that numbers represent are things that you find,
But the numbers
you know,
themselves aren't.
but the numbers themselves aren't. They're a complete abstraction
Yeah.
of just groupings,
Hmm.
just so we could tell how many of anything there is, and then someone discovered that there were laws governing how much of anything there were.
Colors are interesting too, because even though you can
Yeah.
prove colors exist, it's still what makes this red and that orange, because it's a spectrum and we know it's a spectrum. But for some reason we draw the line here and we draw the line there
Yeah, yeah,
and
like,
and then make color
and
names
there are a
for
lot of
between.
other ways that could have gone down,
Right.
you know like for instance, the mantis shrimp. They know that mantis shrimp parse colors entirely differently.
Hmm.
They don't identify colors the same way that we do.
Right. Yeah.
Even though they still see the same visible spectrum.
Right. And it's what's interesting is I have a very young child. He's 3 now, but when he was, I don't remember if it was like 1 going on 2 or mid two. Uh, I was trying to get him to understand colors, and now it's like he's fine. But at the time, you look at it like you say, what's different about these two things? And if it was like a green apple and a red apple, he'd be like, there's nothing different about them. They're both apples. That's the way he looked at it.
Yeah,
And you're
yeah. He
like, yeah,
saw
but
the
one's
apple, but he
red and
didn't
one's
see the
green. And
color
he's
of the
like, what do
skin.
you mean? Yeah. Because then you're saying, well, here's another thing that's red, and you put it next to him, and he's like, that's not an apple. You're like, okay. You're going through this whole thing to try to get him to understand you're even talking about color. Because how do you
Yeah,
describe color to someone? And he can see that they're different. And once he gets it, it's like, oh, this
yeah.
one is
This is
different than
red.
that one, but then
This
he
is
doesn't know how to
green.
describe it either, and it's really entertaining. But you don't
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
see that
yeah.
unless you're talking to a really young child and seeing that like these concepts aren't just innate, inborn concepts that we came out with.
No,
They're taught.
they're assumptions.
Yeah, yeah,
They're these taught assumptions about how to communicate these abstract concepts to
right,
other people, and we just eventually get it.
right.
You know,
It's through
like
like
there's a
enough exposure to it, we get it.
Yeah, like I was talking about this with someone else, because I was reading the Corpus Hermeticus, and I was getting on the point where I was like, look, you have to understand that the Abrahamic faiths all stem out of this idea that words are magical.
Right.
That's everything. That's all three of them. And a guy asked me, he's like, you know, do you think, words are actually like that potent? He's being a little flippant about it.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, here's the thing. People get stuck on the idea that the words themselves are important. But if that were the case, then we wouldn't have a billion languages.
Right. Yeah.
There are more ways of saying cat, than you may ever know.
Hmm.
Which are all viable languages that use it the same way to refer to the same animal as a noun.
Right.
You know, and there are just a million ways of getting that. You know, but sometimes a language has there are very few constants in language,
Hmm.
but the one that is constant across every language, have yet to find the exception, is the word mama.
Oh yeah.
Mama always is the
Yeah.
same in every language.
Yep.
A
And
kid
it's
says
always one of the
that.
first thing a kid can say.
Yeah, yeah, 'cause it's such a simple sound.
Yeah.
All you have to do is like kind of hum in your mouth and then open it, and now you've got ma.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's cool.
And yeah, 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 yeah. It's a really cool aspect of language, but like, yeah, but like the sounds themselves don't matter, but the meaning
And it
is
has to
carried
do
from
with
them.
the meaning to the individual a lot too. I think that's what people miss. 'Cause people think like, oh, things have a like if you don't know magic well and you don't understand how much it has to do with emotion and how you see things, you'll think, well, something's magical or not. It's like, no, no, everything is magical from a certain point of view. Like
Yeah,
as long as you're looking at the psyche or you're looking at like what some people would call the astral, however you want to look at it. But an example of it would be for most people, but not for everyone, would be if you're gonna do a mantra in the morning where you're gonna like repeat something to yourself to make it to reaffirm it, an affirmation, I guess is a better thing to call it. You may have think you see yourself as a weak person, you don't want to do that. So the first thought you might have is maybe I should say I'm not weak. But that's not really a strong sentence because you're defining what you aren't. So a stronger
yeah,
sentence is to say, I am strong, because there's no not in there. Saying I'm not weak is saying there's something I'm not, but it's not saying what you are. But when you say I am strong, you're saying what you are, and that has way more potency and way more force.
yeah. You can't bind something with a solvent, and
Right,
a negative statement is a solvent.
right. And so that type of thing is an example of how words can have power because the way you're phrasing things and the way it makes you feel when you say it affects everything about how well it works for you. But that's different than the individual words or than, thinking that the sounds of the words have the power. It's about the
Yeah,
usage that really makes the difference, which is why political correctness doesn't solve that problem in any way, shape, or form.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
they're just
Because
banning
the
individual words. They're not
meaning.
banning the meaning or the
Yeah,
intent.
yeah. It's not bound with the meaning, and that's a
Hmm.
big issue. That's a big problem.
Right.
And I really feel like the problem with political correctness is that it stems out of uh, postmodern philosophy, which, when you get right down to it, postmodern philosophy is entirely solvent.
Yeah. It's
It's
about
it's
not doing
there's
something. Right.
yeah, yeah. It's all about not stuff.
Hmm.
And it's like it tells you, oh, it's not this, oh, it's not that, oh, and you're like, well, but what is it? Like, if you follow postmodern philosophy far enough, you fall into despair.
Yeah. Right.
You actually fall into complete despair, because you all of a sudden you reach this point where you're like, nothing, literally nothing has meaning.
Right. Yeah.
you know and that's a bad state to be in. That's a bad state to be in, because that's when your negative impulses are most likely to
Hmm.
manifest.
And there's a
you
degree of
know.
truth in that, though, too. You know, you get into the
Yeah.
like everything is illusion and whatever. I mean, you can do this through the spiritual new age path as well and end up in the what's the point of any of this stage if you're not
Yeah.
careful. So, you know,
Yeah,
it's
so you need to be a little careful about that. But yeah, but if you're trying to make yourself into something,
right.
it's you have to use you have to use both hands. You have to
Yeah,
use the coagulate and the solve.
right.
You
Yeah.
know,
And I always think that that's something that the New Age movement got the right saying and got the meaning wrong because they'll say things like
yeah,
you've got to have positive thinking and opposed to negative thinking. And it's like, well, you're almost there, but you're defining positive thinking as thinking of happy things and thinking of light things. That's not what it is. It's
yeah,
using positive statements like, I am this, you are this,
yeah,
and ignoring negative statements like, you are not this, I'm not this. And that will become powerful. So a positive statement in my book would be if you said, you are weak. That's still a positive because you're saying you are that. If you said you're not
yeah,
weak, that's a negative. If you say you're not strong, it's not as powerful. But of course,
yeah.
then you're throwing nastiness at something. It has nothing to do with that. It's about the force behind it.
Yeah, yeah, it's about the force behind it and the fact that the identification becomes a habit.
Right.
You
And
know,
that's why affirmations work. If you do something where every morning you say a certain thing to yourself, eventually it sets in. But you have to do it continually and you have to feel it. So when you do it in the
yeah,
morning, you can't just say it and then move on. You have to say it, but have the feeling behind it, even if you're forcing it, even if you're faking that feeling at first. And then
yeah,
and then eventually after days and days and days, it'll just start to pick up.
yeah. Like it's probably one of the oh god, this to me, I'm like, this is a true statement, but I'm a little um worried about stating it because I am afraid that it would unleash chaos upon people's minds. And I don't mean like literally, like the fucking veil will fucking
No, yeah.
tear open, but like it might wreak havoc with somebody.
Right.
When people ask, like, well, is this real or is it made up?
Right.
I'm like, there are certain things that are real precisely and solely because we believe they exist.
Yeah, exactly.
Like one of them, which I feel is a non-controversial one, is love. Love exists because we believe it does.
Right.
But it has a real effect on the world. It has a real effect on your behavior.
Hmm.
It's hooking into something because we recognize that love is not just mere physical attraction. It it can be linked with that, but it's not the same thing, and we know it.
Right.
You know, so the other thing is, remember, if you're worried about like things being made up, language is made up.
Yeah. Right.
Language is fictional.
Yeah, I have the argument that everything has a degree of being real with it, even the most fictitious and crazy stuff. And it isn't that it's because people are, I feel like, are trying to categorize things as real, meaning that they have physical reality.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they
I
don't
think that
have, it
I think
doesn't
that's what
have to
people
mean
really
that
mean.
because like a book is real and there's a physical book, but the story within it has a reality of its own, and that you can talk about the story later with people that have read the story. You've shared an experience. There's a reality to it, but that doesn't mean it's physical. It's a non-physical reality.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, one of the earliest, and probably some of the best writing advice you will ever hear is make sure that whoever reads it can visualize the thing that you are describing
Right.
without boring them.
Right. Yeah.
If it's just a laundry list of the things that are in the scene,
Yeah.
nobody cares.
That's the trick to it. That's what makes it so
Yeah.
hard to do. That's the magic of writing is trying to make it so that people can see it in their heads without feeling like they're reading anymore.
Yeah, and sometimes you can do that by not even describing the thing.
Yeah, right. Allow the
Like,
imagination to do it.
Yeah, like
Hmm.
to me, Raymond Chandler was the master of that. You know, she was the kind of blonde that make a bishop kick in a stained glass window. You're like, whoa. You know, like you're gonna come up with some like fucking like Jane Mansfield level of blonde. You know, while you're reading that and just be like, woo,
Right, yeah.
damn.
Yeah, and it gives you what you need to metaphorically understand the concept. And that's why
Yeah,
sometimes people will make good books into movies and everyone goes, "Oh, I didn't picture it like the actors and things they did. Like I didn't picture it this way." It's because it was left up to your imagination for a large most part, which is good
yeah,
writing.
yeah. Good writing makes it come alive in your mind.
But the other side
You
of that
know.
too is some people will say that something that is real but non-physically real like that isn't important. They'll say like, "Oh, well, that's imagination or that's this or that." But how many times have you heard a story of somebody who say was suicidal, but they just wanted to finish that Harry Potter book before they went through with it, and then something happened in their life that kept them alive? And you're like, well, the Harry Potter book itself and the story didn't keep them alive. But if that story hadn't existed as a reality, that person may not be here. So it had a
Yeah,
real effect on the world, even though it had nothing to do with the story itself. And so you can't discount it as having an effect here. And the same thing if a story has a really strong idea or sparks the imagination of other people to then do things
yeah,
in the world, because then now you've got something that somebody wrote that's changing the way we're doing things for real. And so there's a reality and there's a potency to these things that is, even if you're not going on a cult level, it's can't be discredited as just being nothing. And yet it
yeah,
is exactly all illusion because it only exists in your mind.
yeah. Like, oh man, one of the things that I love to blow people's minds with, is I often describe Harry Potter as okay. So Harry Potter is the Hermetic corpus for children.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, like everything in Harry Potter is based around either like the Divine Pymander or
Hmm.
sometimes the Kabbalah.
Yep.
You know, but both the Divine Pymander and the Kabbalah are kind of drawing from the same imagery.
Hmm.
So, you know, it kind of amounts to the same thing. Like a lot of people are like, why does the hat say that Harry Potter would have done well at Slytherin? And I'm like, because he's the white serpent.
Right, yeah.
You
Yeah,
know, like, you
it's
know,
all in
Voldemort's the
there.
black serpent.
Yeah.
You know, and they fight. They're fighting over which one of them is going to be dominant, what is going to fall and prove to be bad for people, and what is going to rise and prove to is going to lead to renewal.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep, and that's even why in the storyline he has to die and come back because of course
yep,
rebirth has to be part of the story because in every one of these occult stories it's part of the story.
yeah, yeah. I
It's
was the
part of the
thing
journey.
I was really amazed at. I was amazed that they put it in. I wasn't surprised that they put it in the that J.K. Rowling put it in the book, but I was amazed that they did it in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
very last bit of the movie where he's like he sees Dumbledore again after he's died,
Yeah.
and he's just like, "Wait, Dumbledore, is this real, or is it
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
happening in my head?"
He's like, of course it's
And
in your head.
but who's to say that doesn't mean it's real? That's the
That's
essence of what we're talking about.
yeah, yeah. But see, this is also why it's hard to say what occult movies uh, do you not like? Because on the one hand, I'll look at Harry Potter and go, well, it's painting magic in the Hollywood style, where you're casting spells out and there's stuff flying all over and whatever, and that's not what magic is. But then on the other hand, the themes in it are 100% on point.
Yeah,
So I'm like, okay, well, you put a nice shiny cover on some really good themes, and a lot of these movies are like that when they have the occult in them. You go, well, part of it's wrong, but part of it's right, and the part of it that's right way more than makes up for the part of it that's wrong.
yeah, exactly, exactly. It is the thing I really like about it. Um, but it to me like nothing in the series really came together for me until I got to that last movie,
Hmm.
and that you know that last part of the story
Yeah.
where I'm like, all of a sudden it was like you know you watching it and I'm like, Oh,
Yeah,
oh, that's what she's been doing.
yeah, the
This is
whole
what
time.
she's. Yeah, the
Yeah.
whole time it was right there. I didn't even recognize it. You know, like, yeah, that oh god, that was something I will always be thankful for J.K. Rowling and Warner Brothers Pictures for doing.
Yeah, it's great.
Is bringing that to the screen. I'm like, god damn it.
And I think
There's
the
definitely a moment where I was just like, god damn it. Yeah.
and the Matrix isn't even a movie about magic, but like we've talked about, it's definitely inspired by The Invisibles, which is a
Yeah.
story about magic.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but when people watch that, it's a more acceptable, accessible way to explain certain concepts, like the world not being what it seems and being sort of a simulation or that sort of idea. And it opens the mind up to think about things like, well, what if everything's an illusion? And those sorts of questions, which I think is good for people to be able to discuss. And even though the movie itself didn't necessarily take it there, I think people took it there when they watched it. Everybody kind of got that moment where they're like, oh, they either already had something like that and they were like, oh, I see where you're going with this,
Yeah.
or they didn't and then they were really mind blown by it, which is why it was such the phenomenon that it was.
Yeah, like funniest thing is that the moment in that whole series that I was like, oh shit, someone else saw that. Was, in the second movie, which sucks on toast. It's bad. It's not that good. It's bad. The only reason it's not the worst part of the series is because they made a third one. You
And the
know,
ghost fight was cool.
yeah, yeah, the ghost fight was cool, but I kept finding myself going like, I feel like we've totally broken thematic cohesion with this.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, I get how you justified it, but I feel like you've done this just to do it.
yeah. Yeah, it's an action sequence and that's it.
Yeah. And but the moment that I really like is like, all right, so Neo gets into the room with the architect,
Hmm.
and the minute that happens, I'm like, oh shit, I know what this moment is. Like, this is the moment where, you know, you get there, you're in a white room,
Yeah.
and there's an entity there,
Hmm.
and you're like, and you want the ultimate answer or
Right.
something approaching it, and you ask, and it will tell you. And the thing is that you have the impression that anything that could potentially happen is already known in this moment.
Yeah,
And so to see a visualization of that
yeah,
on the screen was really like chilling.
yeah. It's cool.
Yeah,
But yeah,
you
that's
know.
I mean, love or hate the Matrix movies. I absolutely love the first one, and I think the
Oh
second
yeah.
two are what they were.
Well, I
But
felt like
they brought some good ideas that if I'm trying to explain a concept that we've read about in these books, I can point to the Matrix a lot of times, or I can point to Harry Potter,
yeah.
or to Star Wars with the Force sometimes to explain things like prana, where other people will be like, I don't understand this idea of prana or Brahma or breath and things like that. You're like, well, think about Star Wars and the Force, and you can kind of like mold that to
Yeah.
explain it.
Yeah, yeah. It's like there's this it binds us, penetrates
Right.
us, it's all around us.
Hmm.
And yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
That's
just like
yeah,
a way
very.
to go, okay, well, let's go into pop culture for a moment and find something you already know, and then
Yeah,
expand on that.
yeah, and that's what I think the use of popular fiction really is.
Hmm.
It's kind of a it's I don't want to use words like child or primitive,
Right.
because that's doing a great disservice to it. But I
Maybe
think
entertaining,
entertaining. Yeah, I guess that works.
like an
It's an
entertaining
entertaining way
version.
of getting across the idea, because these are things that we kind of inherently are drawn to.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's why I hate it when people make art films that are deliberately obtuse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm like, whatever your meaning is, if you're not getting it across, I feel like you fail as an artist.
Right. Or sometimes if it's too heavy-handed, that also can be a failure.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's like you
like how
get
many
halfway through the movie and they've retold you the same thing over and over again. You're like, yeah, okay, I get that that's the concept of this movie. I don't have to keep beating the dead horse at this point, you know.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah, like oh god, a movie I felt like it was really like that was Man of Steel.
Hmm.
You know, where I was just like, "Oh my god, I get it. Superman is Jesus.
Right.
Whoa.
So it gets to the point where he
Stop
falls out of the
it."
ship and he's got his arms out, and I'm like, you really? I already knew it. Like, you just like laid it on even thicker at this point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And at that point, it was just like I was just like, "That's it. I'm out. Like, this is terrible. I can't take this anymore."
Right.
You know, they're like, "Well, wasn't he always a Jesus metaphor?" And I'm like, "No, actually, no, he
Right.
wasn't. This is something that has been tacked on because it was all based.
No,
Yeah, it was like
it
all the
has
names
been
were.
done before, even though it wasn't always there. But it was done
Yeah.
like a little bit more tastefully before.
Well, yeah, like it like I always love the Richard Donner, the first full color, like, you know, big budget Superman movie, you know, because I'm like, he told the story so well,
Mhm.
you know, and even though you could make a lot of like, you could poke a lot of physical holes in, you know, turning time back by spinning around the
Yeah.
globe,
Yeah.
you know, like I always found myself going like, well, he has to, he's been told that he cannot interfere and that he can't beat death because Paul Kent died. He couldn't do anything about it. So by the end of the story, he needs to master that. He needs to have conquered it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe that Richard Donner's original ending of Superman 2 had him doing it again.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm like, really, dude? Did you have nothing else?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, someone's like, did you know Snyder's Arandian is because he called his entertainment company Atlas Entertainment? I was like, yeah, I noticed that.
Hmm.
I noticed that. I have the, oh man, if you want, oh my God, if you want to talk about like a story that is basically like devoid of deeper meaning, I can think of no one better to bring up than Ayn Rand.
Oh yeah.
Wow. Like it's one of those things people are like, these books are deep, and I'm like, these are shallow as fuck. You
Hmm.
know, there is nothing underneath that surface.
Right.
You know, oh man, got into so many arguments about that. Like another one that I keep getting into arguments with is VC Andrews.
Hmm.
Because I'm like, I'm not saying that the VC Andrews stories weren't good the first 5 times,
Right.
but if you
It's like the same story.
yeah, same story over and over again. And I remember like there was a period of time, there was like a series of like um I don't know what to call them except like college kidnappings that was going around in like the 80s and 90s.
Hmm.
Like girls are being kidnapped from colleges and they just like disappear.
Yep.
And yeah, people would know. And there was always one of two things in the book bag. It was either a copy of Atlas Shrugged or a VC Andrews novel. And I always like looked at that and went, I feel like there's a connection here.
Right.
You know, why always a girl that's reading one of those two?
Hmm.
You know, it's either Flowers in the Attic or Atlas Shrugged. Why? You know?
Yeah.
And so she was last seen wandering around Caltech with a copy of Flowers in the Attic. So when I ran into somebody who had both a copy of Flowers in the Attic and Atlas Shrugged at the same time, and I was like, great, you just doubled your chances of getting kidnapped. You know?
Beacon.
Yeah. The kidnappers could just fucking feel that thing. It's like, oh, what? Someone's being turned on to objectivism. Quick, gotta stuff them in the trunk. You know, like, why? I don't know. Like, the voices tell me to do it, you know? God. Yeah, I don't know why. I just like remembering that and just thinking of like this. God God damn it, Atlas Shrugged. I remember that South Park episode where it was like, a guy was like, I've just learned to read, and then I read Atlas Shrugged. I read every word of this garbage, and I'm never reading again.
Yep.
Oh, man. Oh, geez. Well, I have had a great time talking with you.
Me too.
Yeah, I feel like we should do this again, but if you've got to work tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, you know it. And I'm on the East Coast, so.
And you're on the East Coast, so you're like, it's like 4 a.m.
Yep.
It's like, I'm getting off a bit lighter. It's only 1 a.m. here. 1 a.m. here.
Yeah.
But to answer Red Cloud's a comment that Red Cloud made, I too have seen the movie Clear Cut. It's awesome.
That sounds familiar, but I don't remember.
It's really okay. It's a slasher movie starring Graham Greene. But here's the twist. The twist is the slasher is either a crazy Indian or a nature spirit.
Mm.
And you're not sure which one it is. It's a David Lynchian slasher movie.
Nice.
I recommend it. It's really cool. Although there are a lot of times when you're going to be like, what just happened? But of course, like the thing that put it on the map was the fact that it has this really gruesome skinning sequence.
Yeah.
Before, like, if you've seen any of the Saw movies, it's nothing in comparison to that. But up until that point, like, no one had done anything like that.
Right, yeah.
And so I recommend it. God, the scene I'll never forget, besides that one, is when he first runs into Graham Greene. They're on a canoe. And it's basically this guy, his white guy, he's in this logging town because he's he's like the guy from the interior that makes sure that everything's like above board. He runs into Graham Greene, and Graham Greene's like, hey, what you fucking doing? And he's like, I'm here to inspect the logging. No, not that. What you doing? Why are you writing everything down? He's like, well, I have to for my report. And he's like, that's one of the problems with you. We around here, we got an oral tradition. You know what that means? An oral tradition? He's like, no. And so Graham Greene reaches down. He picks up a viper that just happens to be there. And he holds it. He points it at the guy, and he bites its head off and spits it out. He goes, oral tradition. You're like, holy crap, this guy's intense.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to let you go for now, Joe.
Yep.
Once again, great having you. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Plug your channel while you're here.
Yeah, it's called The Grand Infinity. It used to be called Psycho Sorcerer, so if you watch any of the older videos, I'll introduce myself as Psycho Sorcerer in those. Introduce myself as Joe March now. I've got my reasons for the change up there if you're interested. But yeah, The Grand Infinity is what it's called now on YouTube.
Excellent. And whereabouts are you located?
Virginia, Richmond, Virginia.
Oh. Got it. Yeah, a lot of that stuff happens there. A lot of this stuff happens in that area. I don't know why. I really couldn't tell you why. It just seems it's one of the places where it hovers. Yeah. All right, man. Well, you take care.
You too.